I'm going to call the meeting to order, and for the council we have a quorum. Councilman Strother is delayed and he should be here shortly.
I call the Planning and Zoning Commission to order. We have a quorum of all members present.
Thank you. Good evening and welcome to our second joint P&Z Council workshop focusing on the proposed plan development rezoning document of the 26-acre tract located at the corner of Trophy Club Drive and 114. Before we get started, I wanted to make sure we all have an understanding of the process tonight. At the beginning of the work session, the P&Z Council, town staff, and the Beck Development Team will be reviewing the proposed PD 30 in detail, page by page, line by line as necessary, to respond to the questions and concerns that staff has already received from P&Z Council and from residents. As you may recall, at the last joint meeting, P&Z and Council were encouraged to submit their comments and questions to staff, and we did. We have also received a number of those from residents. Since many were similar or related to similar topics, staff has compiled them by subject matter in order to allow us to conduct a more orderly and efficient review of the document and respond to everyone's concerns. We understand that those residents attending tonight may have additional comments, and we welcome those. But we also realize that many will be the same as those already submitted. Thus, we believe that if the P&Z Council, landowner, and staff have a discussion of the document first, many of your questions and concerns will be addressed in that general discussion. Public comment will be heard after the P&Z and Council have had the opportunity to discuss the document completely. Ample time will be allowed for public comment after that discussion, but as usual, we will ask that repetitive comments be avoided and the normal 3-minute limitation will be in place. Additionally, I'm requesting that everyone treat this and all individuals involved with respect. We have to keep in mind that everyone here wants what they believe is best for the town. The major difference is in interpreting what that is, and that's what we're trying to get to. We have a lot of material to cover tonight, as well as a number of people who would like to speak, and we will only be able to do that if we work together in an orderly manner. Likewise, comments from the various panels will be done in that fashion. Please be sure to be recognized by myself or the council or Chairman Hill prior to your comments, and we will ensure that everyone has an adequate opportunity to be heard. We look forward to a productive meeting tonight and thank everyone in advance for your cooperation and your comments. And I do thank everyone. We've gotten so much input, really valuable, and we have taken it all to heart. So thank you. Okay.
Madam Mayor and Commissioners, just a couple of early thoughts based on some comments and feedback that we've received from both the P&Z Commission and the Council. You have received a red line document over the weekend, and I understand there was a computer glitch somewhere along the way for the P&Z, and you may have only received half a document until this morning. And those red line document changes represented a total of, I think, 3 minor, there were actually major changes, but they were minor red line documents. I mean, you could take 3 pages out of that 88-page document, and that was the total of those changes that we've made since we've last met. And some of you may have some concern about, you know, what that process is and why there was only 3 red line document changes when we've submitted all these changes to you. First of all, let me remind everybody that we scheduled this meeting when we knew we had the consultants and the Beck team, Beck development team available to go through this document with a fine-tooth comb, however fine that might be for you and the council. That's the purpose of this meeting, is to go through that document page by page, line by line, as necessary to make you feel comfortable and discuss whatever issues you might have. A lot of the comments that were presented over the last couple of weeks involved capitalization and punctuation and that kind of thing. Folks, we're going to make those changes when we have the meat of this document prepared. We're not going to put something out there without all of, that's grammatically incorrect. And lastly, I want to make sure you guys all understand that, you know, your comments don't necessarily make it to the end product. That's something that we're going to discuss. And we don't make changes to that document without the necessary interchange with the Beck development team. It's got to be you know, an agreement in principle between both parties before we make that comment or make that change. And these guys have, believe it or not, they have more than Trophy Club on their plates. And getting these guys on the telephone for a phone conference or to a meeting of any significance is extremely difficult. Their time is demanded by a lot of other people. So I'm fortunate, I feel fortunate that we have all of the representatives, to include the property owners, Mr. Scott Beck here tonight, to go through this document with you and discuss all of those issues that you've already submitted. That's the reason you don't have a lot of changes on this particular document at this point. We have also made a very concerted effort during this process leading up to tonight of controlling that document. Early on, we both had electronic versions of that document. We were making changes and they were making changes, and you can imagine how convoluted and confused that got early on. So we started a process by which we understood who owned that document at the time. I suspect after tonight, we will own that document to make any necessary changes that we agree to collaboratively with the Beck development team. And we'll make those changes and update it. And for the purpose of the folks who are out in the audience, there is a revised document with those 3 red line changes up on the website. So you can go out and review it, download it, whatever you like. And when there are new changes, we'll continue to keep that current so that you can go out to the website at any given time and look and see where we're at. And we'll put a little cover note to indicate what the major changes are related to that new revised document. So with that, Mayor,
And how do you want to?
okay. I have provided for each of you a summary. Carolyn took all of those comments that you provided over the last couple of weeks. Some of you didn't. A lot of you did. We also received a lot of comment from citizens. We've incorporated those, and to give you an index of all the questions would have been meaningless for the purpose of the discussion tonight. So Carolyn synthesized all of those comments into several general areas for discussion, because a lot of them included you know, the SUP for alcohol sales as an example. Everybody thought that needed, you know, we needed to have that discussion. So we've got some broad general topics, and then followed up by some miscellaneous that we couldn't fit into any of those particular topics. We can certainly use that document as a basis for walking through the document and probably getting your particular issue or question answered at that time, but I think it would provide for a framework from which we can talk about the document tonight.
Okay, I just am trying to be clear on how we're going to approach this discussion.
Okay.
We're going to approach it by discussing these items on your summary, or we're going to approach it with the document?
That is one approach, or if you would like to start with page 1, you've all been given a hard copy, and we can start with page 1.
Do you have a plan, Carolyn?
Well, for on the summary, the topics at the top of the page, like the specific use permit, tree preservation, phasing, etc. The applicant is here, Mr. Beck is here, and his team is here, and they might want a chance to address some of
Okay.
these issues to begin with. So rather than, if it's all right with you, with the Planning and Zoning Commission and Council, rather than going page by page through the document, I think it might be helpful if we hear from Mr. Beck and his team on these issues.
Good with that. Okay. The first issue we have is the specific use permit for alcohol sales. And I guess I thought we kind of are in that one before.
Yes.
Is that correct? We will have a specific use permit.
Correct.
So do we need to, everybody's good with that?
Okay, on the commission. specific use permit. Any question?
Okay. Tree preservation plan. Do you want to address that?
We continue to work on that, Madam Mayor. I'm Bill Dahlstrom, 901 Main Street. We continue to work on the tree preservation plan. As you know, there are a significant number of trees on the property, and it's our internal requirement that we're going to preserve the trees along the creek. We are currently factoring in what other trees are on the site and how we might be able to address those. And we have discussed different alternatives on tree preservation, such as maintaining trees, that is redesigning parking lots or designing parking lots around trees, but where there may be a building pad or a driveway access, those trees could be removed. Given the number of trees that are going to be required to be planted out here as part of the tree planting requirements, it's going to far exceed. We believe it'll far exceed the number of the caliper inches that we will need to be removed. So we're continuing to work on that issue.
Okay. So if I understand correctly, we have a requirement that you preserve or replace trees, and you're saying that you're working on a plan, but you're not at this point suggesting that we don't go along with that.
We will have a tree preservation plan, correct?
Will there be mitigation?
Yes, sir. I'm sorry. There will be
Preservation
yes.
and mitigation?
There will be mitigation. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Did anyone else have a question on that? The
Any
council?
question? I'd ask the commission if you do have a question on some of these, raise your hand so that I can call attention to it. Thank you.
Okay. The phasing and infrastructure plan.
This again was something that we continue to work with the town's consultant on. This was one, we only have a 26-acre tract of land, and typically, I don't know if we would need a full phasing and infrastructure plan separate, apart from the next step. The next step is going to be a preliminary site plan. So we've agreed to go ahead and incorporate that component of a phasing and infrastructure plan into the preliminary site plan, so that the same information and requirements will be incorporated in the next step of our development process.
Carolyn, could you just help us understand exactly what we mean, what this is referencing in this context?
The phasing and infrastructure?
Yeah, the reason that it's at issue and what it is exactly we're talking about?
It depends on, and Scott, I'll ask you to jump in here too if you'd like to. It depends on how the developer plans to develop the property. Phasing could become important if he is going to do it in small increments.
Well, Mayor, if I could address that.
Please.
You're good.
It just depends on the ownership going forward. Mr. Beck may indeed develop the property himself in its entirety, or he may sell off portions of it to other vertical developers. And the phasing plan really relates to both conditions. If he develops it himself, you want to make sure that, for example, the connectivity within the project has some basic continuity to it from the edge of the project internally, in terms of sidewalks and streets and those sorts of things. And if he sells it off, you want to make sure that as development occurs down a particular street or muse, to use the term that's being used in the document, that, for example, you don't have one side of the street sold off and that side of the street's unfinished at a certain level. And so this is not so much to hold Mr. Beck to a particular deployment of infrastructure. I think that's really up to him and his designers, but so that the town has the opportunity to at least make sure that however it is phased, it makes some reasonable sense, especially in the context where portions of it are sold off and there's multiple vertical developers over time.
So that, then we're saying that phasing and infrastructure should be part of what we approve here.
Well, I think what Mr. Dahlstrom is proposing is an interim step that normally is not done at this level. Usually that's done later on, but I think what he's offering is a reasonable compromise. Again, there's no way to know how the infrastructure will be phased over the entire project, and we're not suggesting that needs to be done. But there needs to be some anticipation at site planning, I think, that as the actual infrastructure is designed and constructed, there's some continuity in terms of the access, and you don't want incomplete streets and those sorts of things.
Thank you.
Again, we're not trying to micromanage what the phasing substance is, just that there's a way for the town to have an early look at what is anticipated, so if there are some concerns, that can be negotiated, and the developer can provide some explanation or modify it.
The process is, again, our next step would be a preliminary site plan, and at that point, we'll have a general idea, still going to be somewhat conceptual, but a general idea of the, as Mr. Polkoff said, the connectivity and continuity of infrastructure and sidewalks, et cetera. So it made sense to us that it be a component of the preliminary site plan.
Okay. Council, anybody have a question?
Commission, comment, question on this item?
Okay. All right. Multifamily, obviously this is a significant issue, and the comments is a limit the amount in the plan development, and that there's a preference for ownership versus rentals. Do you want to give us your current update, or do you want us to do?
Madam Mayor, if I could, I need to share with the Beck Development Team kind of the flavor of the comments that we received, and it was pretty much unanimous across the board. You know, when we talk about a mixed-use development, including multifamily, in our opinion, at this point, this document doesn't present any kind of limitation whatsoever as to how much or what the multifamily units look like, other than, at this point, 500 square feet minimum size. But the comments we received across the board said, you know, we all recognize that this is a very important commercial opportunity, commercial development opportunity that we have very precious little of in this community, and we want to make sure that that's taken full advantage of, and you as the property owner understand that that would be the highest use and best use of that property. I think there would be a strong comfort level if we had some limitation on the amount of multifamily as you cross the entire spectrum of the development. And right now, there's no limitation in the document, and that's kind of where the flavor of that comment came from.
It's an interesting issue in that most of these types of developments, I can think of a couple that there are no, those types of limits have not been placed on them because it's important to make sure there is a density to support the development. And that's where we're trying to go as far as, I don't know if we don't have a number right now, Mr. Slay.
Well, the concern obviously is, you know, if we left it unmanned or unnamed, you know, not to say that you would, but conceivably you come in and put 26 acres worth of a, you know, multifamily apartment complex.
Understand.
You know, and I don't think that there's a person on the dais here that's comfortable with that.
I mean, we have to bear in mind that the commercial aspect is, this is our prime commercial property. Mm-hmm. You know, it is not something that we desire to be primarily residential property. You know, we recognize, and I support multi-use, but not, you know, there has to be a limit. And we have to be able to protect, you know, what we're going, because, and I remember you explained last time that, well, it could be a timing thing. Well, if it's a timing thing, then that's saying, if we put no limits on, that the first thing you do is put in an apartment complex, that's not going to work. It's just not. And so we have to find a way, because we do want it, we want all of us to be successful here. We want the town to be successful, we want you to be successful. But we need a way to make sure that we provide what our residents are looking for, and to provide it in the appropriate fashion. Does anyone on the council have a comment?
Madam Mayor and Chairman Hill and folks that are here, first of all, thanks for coming, but I have a very big concern on the multiple housing. Condos, townhouses, I think that's one thing, but when we start thinking about multiple housing with apartments, high-rises, or any of the alike, what happens there is we add a lot of citizens that expect a lot of services and amenities, and yet they're really not greatly contributing to what we would have to offset that, frankly. So that's a very big concern, and it is only 26 acres. I know we looked at a lot of things that have gone on at Legacy, and I don't know what percentage you ended up with at Legacy, but it looked to me, when I looked at the map, and unfortunately I was not here that evening, but it looked to me like it was over 50%, and that's, in my opinion, as one council person, way too high. But I don't want to put numbers on here. I think it's way too early to do that. I just think you need to understand the citizens that I've heard from very clearly have made it, for me, that's not what we're interested in. We're interested in something to help generate sales tax dollars to help lower our property tax dollars out here the citizens have to pay, because we don't have hardly any commercial. And I'm really concerned that we protect that as we move forward.
I think you're right. I think we're all looking for the same, ultimately the same successful development. There is no better opportunity around than this one, I believe. And I think it's something I'd like to discuss with our team. We don't have we understand what the issue is, and I think as part of our formal application, we'll come back with something.
I could only make one comment to you, Margie, which is,
I'm sorry, could you just pull the microphone a
I'm
little
sorry,
closer?
let me get closer to it. This is Scott Beck. Just one comment that I'd make with regard to the multifamily, which is depending on the type of development we'd like to see here, and you've kind of seen in the past what the two other members of the team have kind of shown you, I think, at the last meeting, is a world-class type of development. Depending on the timing of when you build that development, is going to be very indicative of what the retailers are going to expect in terms of both day and night use. So, the amount of traffic that from residential usage. So, for example, if you wanted a dry cleaner on property, right, then they're going to want to have some residential on property, not just the people that live in town for that extra foot traffic. I mean, that's just like one of probably 1,000 examples that you could have in terms of even from a restaurant perspective. You want some type of an office component so that during the day, those people in that office are coming downstairs and eating in those restaurants. So it's not just night traffic. So, as we, I guess, continue to go through this process and document, I'd like for you at least to keep that in mind in terms of, our development team is certainly cognizant of the fact that the town doesn't need more residential, right? But we want to make sure that we have the appropriate amount of residential in the development to be able to get the right type of retail tenants that'll come in that want that type of mix inside of the mixed-use development, and it's really trying to play that game, if you will, with these retailers to coax them into coming this direction of Southlake. As obviously there's not a tremendous, I guess some developments almost jumped over us a little bit, but trying to bring into this this kind of pot in the middle here. So at least wanted to bring that up.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Madam Mayor, may I make a comment? Mr. Beck, you said the word quality, and that is a very important concept. And I was thinking about it this weekend because, again, we've had residents say, we don't want a bunch of apartments. And sometimes many of us, based on experience, are visuals. We
We're looking at the quorum.
visual apartments. And so my thinking is that if you go out to the out Trophy Club Drive and you start driving around and seeing the quality homes that are being built, and certainly the projects that you've done previously, it's quality. Therefore, how can we trust that you will pursue creating a quality environment that is consistent with what we look like in Trophy Club? And I suspect that's, you know, an issue too. You know, the intent is to start a project, but then it doesn't maintain the vision.
And I think it's an excellent question, Jeanette. I appreciate the question. And you know, our family views Trophy Club as a legacy project. So this property, this 26 acres, has no debt on it. You know, it more than covers its taxes already. And so, you know, that's quite frankly why we've had the luxury of sitting with it and waiting for the development to come to us, as opposed to kind of pushing the envelope and trying just to get something done. You know, when my father started out here almost 18 years ago, you know, there were no schools out here. He donated the land for both a middle school and an elementary school. And then we did the deal to put the high school in Trophy Club. So, I mean, we really look at this as something, although, you know, the residential is a perishable commodity. You have to sell it. People have to move into their homes, and you don't have that land. The 26 acres, you know, my grandkids will own that 26 acres. So, you know, while I appreciate the Margie's comment as it related to condos and townhomes, I don't really see many of those going in here, because obviously then you create the issue of not being able to sustain the look and appearance, because you have homeowners associations and other things that then exist, and then you lose control. With multifamily, you own the multifamily and you also own the commercial. Thus, you can control what actually happens inside of the development on a perpetual basis. So I think from a legacy project perspective, you know, since we do intend to keep it, and it's not a build and sell type of development for us, you know, you know, without you hearing that from me, I think it'd be something that could certainly cloud your perception of what could be built out there. But we do intend to keep it on a perpetual basis. So that's kind of the direction that we're heading with the project.
Thank you very much.
Uh-huh.
Mayor, Mayor and Chairman, I'd just like to offer alternatives to how you can regulate the quality and the influence of multifamily in a project. The kinds of projects that I know you all are interested in seeing on the 26 acres traditionally have not included a kind of early pre-market determination through the regulatory process of what the ratio should be in terms of a number of units of residential versus the square footages of commercial. In fact, I think there's a danger of trying to do that now, because it might be the case that another 100 units of a particular type of residential may be the difference of attracting several 100,000 square feet of commercial. It just depends on the evolution of the project, the tenant mix, the timing. And the problem is we just don't know. And so one of the alternatives to regulating the impact of multifamily on the project is to do it through the development standards themselves. And one of the recommendations that we've made is that along certain streets, that the building type and the residential unit type that would manifest itself in those buildings be driven through development standards, as opposed to trying to estimate today what a cap should be on the multifamily. In other words, that's a long-winded way of saying you create a window in which it's too expensive to develop the whole property out as multifamily. But it's not so onerous that you can't find a good market mix where this becomes a place where it's actually a neighborhood. because the kind of tenants that Mike showed you when we were here last together, the kind of tenants that I know Scott is looking for, they ultimately are going to be concerned about the same thing you're concerned about. They're going to want to avoid conflicts. They're going to want to have the type of residential tenant there that's going to be open to offices and restaurants and those sorts of things. And so I think the opportunity is to try and work out a document here where the market embraces what you want and what the Beck family wants. And I'm afraid that sometimes just trying to come up with a number of units and putting in the document is too coarse a tool to do that. Now, Mr. Beck and his team would have to agree, I think, to some level of standards that would make it almost impossible for them to spec build all multifamily. And I think we're actually quite a long down the road to doing that. I still think there's some additional elements that could be included to make sure we get to that point. But I would encourage you to consider a more nuanced approach because, frankly, the bottom line is in order to deliver the kind of multifamily that I'm hearing them say they want, it's a fairly expensive cost to build that type of building long term. That's not to say that you don't want to allow some buildings to be all multifamily, but in the key locations where you do want to have mixed use and non-residential, there's a way from a market perspective to put that in the document without micromanaging at what point in time, how many units, and how do they evolve over time.
One thing I was wondering, have you all done much in the way of market studies? I mean, we're looking at this and we're kind of looking at what we all probably have our own vision of what would make sense or what we think would be great, what we think would, but do we actually have any good data that says what could sell, what could have possibility of actually being developed or supported? And I know, for example, we've done some studies and we know that we have a tremendously large, just in case you weren't aware of that, I'm sure you are, a daytime base just in the surrounding businesses. But what I'm just trying to, because one of the questions that's come to me a lot from people is, well, if you want this, is anybody going to come here with this? So what kind of information, if, and maybe too early, but I'd like to know if you have done any market analysis to know what the real possibilities are.
We have not done any of our own market analysis. It's merely the market analysis from Retail Connection and UCR and some of the other Herb Weitzman's group. Basically the retailers that do a lot of retail type spec building or investments in the area, and then also in Dallas and Fort Worth, but nothing specific to out here. I mean, quite frankly, it's kind of hard when you have a 26-acre piece that's zoned professional office and we don't know what the town is going to be willing to let us do to start doing market research on basically, an amorphous concept.
Well, I think the situation, too, is that the town wants to know what kind of ideas you have to bring in here.
What kind of what?
What kind of ideas you have to be bringing in here in the way of commercial businesses. So we can go into that as we go through the document.
Yeah, that'd be great.
On the commission, Commissioner Sheridan.
I know the summary uses the word limit. We got 26 acres, less the floodplain of the creek. It's the golden crown or the golden nugget or whatever of our commercial property. I'm still not convinced that any residences go on the ground. I'm not against anything above ground, meaning second floor. I don't have my exact facts, but there was a study, or I heard somewhere while I've been on P&Z, that a single-family house, in order to pay for itself for the resources that it takes, the services, versus the taxes that it pays, has to be in the realm of $225,000. Or if anybody can help me out with that one, it was a town study by the EDC or something. while I'm against, or I'm very concerned with any multifamily, I'm trying to balance this. This is a revenue issue. This is a money issue for us. And has already been mentioned about the taxes. So I'm trying to compare, well, if a residential house has got to be 225,000, and I'm using that number loosely, to pay for the services it's going to get, what does a townhome take? What does a multifamily take? And what's the relationship to an office, and what's the relationship to retail services? In other words, where does that stick in? If I'm thinking of, hey, this is one of the last chances we have of producing taxes, either property taxes or sales tax, I'm not seeing it in multifamily, but I'm open to hearing somebody talk about it, or the dollar relationship to a single family. Does that make sense? Thank you. Okay.
Somebody down there. Anyone else?
We haven't done that kind of analysis.
Yeah, we haven't done that analysis, but I mean, I guess I'd kind of
Well, it
echo.
could be the EDC. I'm not asking.
Yeah, I'd echo, I mean, my comment, Mr. Sheridan, would only simply be, you know, when you look at that relationship, in terms of multifamily, and/or townhomes, I do think that there's probably a significant correlation with the more multifamily that you put on the property, the more commercial you'll have. It's kind of, it goes hand in hand. So, and the more commercial that you have, the more tax revenue you have. So, you know, when you look at high-density areas like West Village or even some other places in downtown Dallas or Shops at Legacy in Plano, you know, when you have more people physically in a close proximity, they want more services, thus you're able to, you know, they just want to walk downstairs and get whatever they can get. So, you know, we're not talking about, you know, building a strip center next to the Quorum Apartments, which is happening currently, you know, in your town right now. That would be a question, I think, that would be more suited towards Merdad's development that's directly next to the Quorum Apartments, not a high-density mixed-use development on the 26 acres.
Commissioner Reed?
It seems to me that predominantly people do not want any multifamily homes in that area. It was zoned commercial by our predecessors when we first became a town, and it was, the purpose of it was to generate income for the town. The way things are laid out here, we're essentially losing all control of what's going to be built there. And I think that we should at least have some means of protecting the town against more multifamily dwellings than we want. Now, if Mr. Beck comes up with some people that want to develop something and they need to have some mixed multifamily homes to go with it, he's free to come back to us at any time and prove to us why he needs it, and okay, we'll approve it. But in the meantime, I think we need to maintain control of the fact that there won't be any multifamily homes there until the developer comes to us with a specific proposal and shows us that it is important to have that multifamily home in order to bring those commercial programs into the town. We got to have some control on it. It's our town. We got a great town here, and we want to keep it the way it is. And that doesn't include lots of multifamily homes.
Anyone else
Okay.
on the commission? Commissioner Forrest? No, Reichert, Commissioner Reichert.
Commissioner Gary Rickert, just one question. I note on page 46, item E, that there is no maximum building height for multifamily buildings if they're located more than 150 feet away from single-family zoning. Is that in conflict with residential building height numbers in the earlier part of the document?
You got it.
46E.
Gary, this is a topic that I think we will be going into as we go through page by page rather than,
Yeah, I
Getting,
just, because
in-
it relates to
yeah.
multifamily, I just wondered
Right,
if this
okay.
was, if there was a relationship to that.
That would have to be reconciled with the, what's on the conceptual plan. Yeah, that's, I think you're correct. There is a inconsistency there.
yeah, I think that's all from the commission at this time.
With respect to multifamily housing, I recognize the need for the density that you're talking about, and I think that it's possible to develop that property in a dense fashion. And I think it can be done so it's visually appealing and not something that is objectionable, and that has to do with sight lines from the exterior of the property. As far as multifamily goes, looking at the need for commercial in the town, I think that it's important that we do commercial retail business on the first 2 floors, preferably of a building. And perhaps if we do condominiums, allow those on the 2nd floor. But when I look at apartment structures, multifamily in the apartment mode, personally I'm looking at floor 4 and above. And I think that type of a restriction across the property would allow you, if you're doing multi-story, to bring in the apartments of a suitable size, which would be aesthetically in parallel with Trophy Club standards, and then go on up from there. Now, I understand you're looking for 11 stories. I don't know the reason for the cap at 11, but here again, there's a possibility of density that's aesthetically appealing.
I'd like to just make a comment. I guess this is, I'm a slow learner, but what I've really heard tonight is that without multifamily development, there is no commercial development. And without good commercial development, I mean, if you don't have somebody to buy and consume, then we don't have anything of value either. So the two go hand in hand.
I think it's a valid comment, Jeanette. I mean, I think that with one caveat, you can have commercial development without multifamily. It's just you're not going to get the commercial development that I want or you want.
That's right.
So you're not going to have high density.
Right.
You're going to have more of where Quiznos is.
Right.
So, and I don't think anybody wants that. You're going to have more of what Merdad's doing next to the Quorum Apartments.
Exactly.
If you want to get Fox Sports in here and you want to get, some really cool restaurants, and, great retail stores and those types of things, the only way you're going to get them is to have, an urban mixed-use development with, an entertainment destination type things, some type of a movie theater that's like an iPix or a, like an Angelica. You're going to have some type of a hotel component, not, a value place type of hotel component that's tied in with the country club. We've had discussions with Club Corp about conference centers inside of that, an office component. I mean, if you don't have all of those things, you are going to have a big box strip center, and that's all we're going to be able to build here.
Yeah.
And I kind of would hearken also back to some of the other comments, which are, if the zoning component does not allow for multifamily, it is not possible, and we do developments all over the country, it is not possible for us to go out there and market, okay, with a project that doesn't have multifamily, and when someone gets tangentially interested and then finds out there's no multifamily, they're not going to say, oh, well, wait, give me a couple of months and I'll take it through planning and zoning and city council and then see if I can get some multifamily. It doesn't happen. And because we do so many projects and we know that it doesn't happen, we won't even engage. I mean, we won't even spend the money to go out to ICSC and start marketing the project because we already know what the answer is. The answer is they don't wait. They go down the street. They go somewhere else.
I think that, and I understand what you're saying. I think that is actually the reason that we're trying to do this whole thing.
Oh, yeah, no,
Because
I'm
we have
absolutely.
I believe we have a recognition of that. I agree with, with what you're saying, and why we're trying to lay it out. And I think that's the thing that we really have to keep in mind is we're not trying to turn over or relinquish control. What we're trying to do is set that framework so that it can happen. But it can happen in the way we all need it to happen. So.
I think some people get hung up on the term multifamily because they think of 2 adults and 3 kids running around. And I don't think that's the kind of development that you're going to be able to afford to put in, because you're not going to be able to charge, you're going to have to charge a higher rent for what I refer to as dinks, dual income, no kids. Those are the kind of people that want to live in an urban environment. And I think it might be helpful if we change the terminology and stop using multifamily in apartments.
It's definitely not garden apartments, right? I mean, this is, and I think Mr. Polikoff put it best. I mean, these are going to be people that want to be in an urban environment, right? Where there's potentially people out at restaurants making noise at 10, 11 o'clock at night. You're not going to have children upstairs on the 3rd floor overlooking the restaurant at 10 o'clock at night. You'll be very upset living there with, a restaurant downstairs. So, it's definitely your probably non-married couple that's living in there, or a single person, or someone that travels. I mean, there's a lot of people that work for the airlines that live out in this area. A lot of people that even in Trophy Club. I mean, I could see those type of people living in that kind of an urban environment where they don't have time to go to that dry cleaner or what have you. But having it downstairs is fantastic. And so those are the types of things I think that we'd want to be trying to build and attract those types. And Larry, I'm not sure what we would call it, but it's definitely exactly what you're describing and not kind of your traditional garden style apartment.
I think we've covered this one. Okay, let's move on to the next topic.
Mayor, if I could, just one more comment as it relates to multifamily. You started this discussion with the comment that you would take this multifamily restriction, if you will, back and consider and come back and talk to us about it.
Yes, sir.
As you heard these comments, I don't think that, with the exception of Commissioner Reed, who doesn't want any multifamily housing, everybody understands that, you've got to have that to make this kind of an idea work. And I understand what Mr. Polikoff is saying in terms of designing this document so that, you build high-end, whatever you want to call them, multifamily housing, and you do it through the design standards of this document. What we also have at our disposal, if you want to consider some kind of restriction, 30, 40, 50, whatever that number is, you always have the ability to come back and amend this document. If we get into a position where you need that extra 100 units to get X person to trip that, pull that trigger. You can, I mean, just because the document says something doesn't mean it can't be changed. So, I think it would be more palatable to the elected officials and the P&Z if we did have some kind of restriction on what that multifamily component to this mixed-use development would be. If I'm speaking out of turn for anybody, say so.
Depending on how we further refine our requirements.
Well, and Mayor, if I do want to clarify something. I don't think the document is there yet in terms of the development standards necessary to assure through a market dynamic the proper balance. I think structurally it's set up to do that, but I do think it's still too open-ended.
Right.
Some
Okay.
some definition in numbers It's
am I-
something we're going to have to.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not talking about a definition of numbers. I'm talking about a street-by-street definition of the development standards, the building types, and the characteristics of what is built on those streets that would not preclude, I'll call it urban residential. How's that?
There you go.
That would not preclude urban residential, but that would make it cost prohibitive to build all urban residential.
Right. And what we're trying to say is that a percentage versus tighter controls. We aren't there yet to know which is the right way to go at this point.
I think that's right.
Okay. All right. The next topic is the height of the buildings. And there was those who also had a question specifically on limiting on Indian Creek. But we all have gotten, we've discussed the idea of a, 10-story, 12-story hotel, office building, or whatever. And needless to say, that's kind of like a very large thing compared to everything else we have. So it's very hard to even visualize, much less be comfortable with at this point. I guess I would like to hear your thoughts on where you think it will go, and then hear the council's.
Anyone? Go ahead.
I'm Mike Twitchell. I'm the architect with the Beck team. We understand that being in proximity to the residential is very sensitive. In all reality, if a hotel or an office building came in, they'd want the access and visibility from Highway 114 and from Trophy Club. So in reality, I would expect that that's where the buildings would be. Number one, you don't want to be driving through very far away from the intersection to get to that location with hotel or office building. So all in reality, I would think in the expectation of, well, I've seen out at Legacy, you want to be close to that intersection at Trophy Club and 114.
There's been some concern expressed about the height limitation on anything on Indian Creek and on Indian Creek Drive, the street itself, and near the creek where there is residential property just to the east of the creek, there's concern about that existing housing. Having a high facade just across that small creek from them.
Over here.
But we have a setback from the creek of substantial distance. Number one, I think everybody really needs to understand that we're not removing any of the trees along the creek. The intention is to leave that creek alone. And the property line's through the middle of that creek, and we've got a substantial number of trees. I can't imagine how many trees there are. Probably 500 to 1,000 trees in that area that are remaining, not to be touched. And that has always been the intention of the team, as well as Mr. Beck, to leave that creek alone. If we do anything, we'll do a hike and bike trail through there, which we have indicated on a conceptual plan to hook up with the neighborhood, so that the neighbors can bring their bicycles and literally bike to the project. That's very important. It's done. The Legacy's done a lot of mixed-use projects. So that would be going through there. So that'd be part of the city.
But the likelihood of multifamily immediately across, set back from that A Street there, even with the 50-foot setback, if you're talking an 8, 10, 12-story, you're going to be well above those trees and in the very, okay, 50-foot
Yeah,
maximum height.
we've got setback, I think, are appropriate.
Yeah,
I
it's a
think
setback and it's tiered.
All right.
And I think that was something that was very clear, that your staff had articulated, and that we're the ones that designed, built and developed Hogan's Glen, so certainly we're cognizant of what's over there. As well as we still have 10 acres in Hogan's Glen, Villas Phase 2 that we're going to be developing probably in the next 24 months with Merdad and Centurion American. So we're very cognizant of the fact of what's over there, which is specifically why it's both setback and then tiered.
Well, then will you leave the trees along Indian Creek, because there are a bunch of beautiful trees along there.
I mean, I think it's, you know, from a general sense, right, it's the intention just with any type of development, and you can see, even if you drive through Hogan's Glen or Eagles Ridge, we didn't actually go in. Centurion American did everything back in the Highlands, so, I mean, a lot of it was just kind of flat anyways. But if you go through our other developments in the town, specifically Hogan's Glen, you can tell, I mean, I went out there personally with John Harbin, when obviously he was still living, and we literally moved roads to avoid trees. So, you know, that's going to be the general mantra just of all developments that we do from a Beck perspective, irrespective of kind of how things get written, you know, in a document. So certainly, you know, our intention is to kind of preserve and keep as much integrity as possible, you know, in any one of our developments. So that's just kind of, you know, how we kind of operate in general.
One other comment on the height of the hotel. 2 or 3 years ago, we had a proposal from 2 hotel companies that were interested in building in that area there on Highway 114. And I think they were, what, Gene, 4 or 5 stories?
5 stories.
5 stories. And let me tell you, we had a flood of protests right quick that it was too tall and only 5 stories. So 12 stories is out of the question.
But those particular properties were very close to residential.
Yes.
Where this conversation is in the tiered to buffer it from the residential and keep it more oriented to 114, if I understand the conversation
That's
correctly.
correct.
If I may.
That is correct.
Speaking of the height and the structures, I mentioned earlier to something that would be aesthetically pleasing. I think if we're looking at the area that backs up to Lake Forest Village there, the treat area, that buffer line, I think there's a floodplain that goes through there to begin with, 100-year floodplain. So what I was looking at, and then you were looking at a street next to that floodplain area. I think if you put, in my concept, if you were to put townhomes along there, brownstones, and have those, I mean, South Lake's got some that are 3 stories. And I think with the trees in there, that the trees would provide a sufficient buffer if we don't go more than 3 stories along there with the trees remaining. If you put 3 stories along there, come out to Indian Creek and stick with either probably 3 stories along Indian Creek, not necessarily brownstone now. I'm looking at commercial, perhaps along there. Then get out to Indian Creek and go either 3 or 4 stories and build a ring around the property at that height level. And then from there, take from the front of those buildings, run a 30-degree elevation line. I don't think you'll see anything behind those buildings from the street. I think your view would be blocked at the 30-degree line. You're asking, I think, for a 45. But I think if you go 30 degrees, you'll find that you still have a lot of room in the center of that property to put up 11-story buildings. And quite frankly, personally, what you put out there along the freeway, along the frontage, if you want an 11-story building out there and it's blocked from vision on the 2 sides or on the 3 sides going around, I'm happy with that.
I appreciate that, Bill. I think that it's an excellent comment, and you know, part of this is just one step. You know, this zoning process is just the very first. I'll almost call it the baby crawl step of a fairly substantial process that our development team will go through before we even get close to kind of even making those kinds of decisions. But certainly, you know, there's going to be several studies done, several town charrettes that we'll be doing with residents and you know, obviously council people, anybody that wants to come to those. You know, the most important thing in any kind of a development, especially one where you have an embedded population, is to first and foremost build for the population, right? Because those are going to be, you know, the main patrons, obviously in addition to the people that you're building, you know, residential housing for on the property. But, you know, we fortunately in Trophy Club have a built-in population base. And so, you know, that's going to be the first and foremost. And those types of things in terms of, you know, creating the appropriate environment are so critical. there's so many examples of how not to do it. And I'll just give one off the top of my head, but, Victory, downtown Dallas, right? That's an example of how not to do it, right? It creates such a mass in terms of the size and scale that nobody wants to be down there. It's almost daunting when you're walking through those areas. So, one of the reasons that we selected working with Mr. Twitchell's firm is really because of his sense of scale. I mean, I went through a lot of his projects. Certainly the one kind of closest that people, who are residents here, who want to see it, obviously can go see Shops at Legacy, but there's a beautiful sense of scale when you're walking down the paseos, certainly in Phase 1. And it has a lot of those angles that you're talking about, because there's some fairly substantial buildings in and around that project. And so, we do definitely, you can see it from in here, just in this diagram in terms of those setbacks and the angles. We certainly are thinking about that, and that's going to be of great importance, because, if you can't get people to come that are around the area or even from external because they don't like the right scaling, that's, that human sociology and human psychology as it relates to that density is extremely important. And it's an art form. And this guy's, proven over a 35, 40-year history in doing it, to learn how to do it right. And quite frankly, I think, your town consultant, Scott Polikoff, has really created a name for himself in the DFW Metroplex also, as understanding those components also. So you guys selected a great, great city consultant as well.
Thank you.
I'd like to reiterate one thing that Scott said. I've been at Shops Legacy for 15 years from the very beginning. I can get into facts and figures and percentages, that's fine, but what Scott just said is very important, that you cannot go into any kind of development, in my opinion, and make the neighborhood mad. It just doesn't work. Short term it may, but for long term, if a family's going in there with 26 acres and going to hold long term, he's going to develop a high quality project that will live for a long term, that will have a sense of scale and be appropriate for a neighborhood as well as a highway for a long term. So you have to, there is flexibility, as we talked about in the past, but you can't make the neighborhood angry. So I don't think there's any intention for us to do anything that would not behoove the happiness of Trophy Club.
Thank you.
And one other thing, I apologize, I just wanted to echo, the most important word I think he just uses, the flexibility word. And in talking with staff and understanding some of the comments of residents is, where's that balance in terms of, too much flexibility, right, versus enough control that the city has. And, I guess to some degree, it's a great question. But, hopefully in going through this process, you kind of start to understand what we're looking for in terms of the development. And then ultimately, in order to get that world-class development, we really need that flexibility because, we really want to get the highest and best use for the commercial components and the office components. And we just need that flexibility to basically say, this is going to be what's right, and, and we can get it done. We need to kind of come back. We need to obviously have discussions and kind of design it appropriately. But to go through, a whole process over again, especially since it's such a small tract of land, would almost prohibit us from getting the best possible product on the property. So I just thought that was a good point.
Okay. Does anyone else have a comment on it? Okay. We'll move on to permitted uses. Oil and gas exploration. I think I can speak for a lot. The fact is, we have horizontal drilling now. I don't see any reason there would be any kind of a gas well on this property.
There's not going to be.
So we can make that clear, right, in the document?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the fact of the matter is that the mineral state's the dominant state, So we can't kind of legislate out the fact that it's going to be there. But we don't have any intention of drilling or letting somebody drill an oil and gas well on the pad. That would take up like 4 or 5 acres of a small 26-acre tract. As well as, it's, you know, since we were involved in that, all of the minerals are already being drained from underneath this basin. So I would say it's extremely remote that anything would happen.
Well, I think that, I understand what you're saying, and I totally agree with that. I think this is going to be an issue. We're going to need a real comfort level, that people are going to need to be comfortable that that won't happen.
How is it written in there right now? I mean,
Right?
As a
It's-
permitted
You could
use.
supply with the city, the town's oil and gas ordinance.
So as it's written in there right now, you
that's how
can,
it is right now, right? It's not really changing anything.
right. But I guess just because we're putting it in this document, it makes it sort of in everybody's face that, yes.
And we're
you
not
could-
changing anything?
No, in everybody's face, that yes, you could put, you know, that the way it's written, you could put a gas well there. And we know you don't want to, we don't want to, why don't we just say that?
Are you comfortable just removing it from as a permitted use?
I would, if I could get with Patricia on the other ordinance, I think that's where we're leaning towards, but I just want to make sure that we don't do something in this ordinance that might affect us under any leases that he might have.
Right.
Because I don't know what those say, as well as what the town ordinance says on oil and gas. Our preference, we're leaning that way, Mike, yes.
As long as surface facilities were prohibited on the grounds, it would have no effect on the underground. If someone wanted to whip stock under there, that's entirely up to the mineral rights owner, but prohibition of surface facilities on there would be very feasible. You couldn't put a gas well in there.
Depending on what the existing lease agreements say.
Pardon?
Depending on what the existing lease agreements say.
Okay, well, you all understand our
Yeah,
concerns.
understand.
So we'll let the attorneys work on it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
That was the only thing I was saying. I don't think it's a problem. We don't we don't anticipate it, but to his point, we can't do anything that we're prohibited from doing.
Right. Okay.
I mean, we spent, what, Gene, 3 years trying to figure out where those things would go, so
Right.
I think they're pretty much set where they are, and they're pretty much done at this point anyways.
Okay, drive-throughs.
This is a sensitive topic, guys. I mean, you know, across the board, there are, you know, and I've gone out into the community and talked to them about drive-throughs. There, you know, we have the infamous Taco
Taco Bueno.
Bueno. Okay.
That Roanoke is making a fortune
There's
on.
too many taco somethings out there, but, you know, my sense is half the people I talk to are very comfortable with drive-throughs. The other half condemn them. You know, give us some idea of what you mean by, or what could possibly be there. What do you envision?
Let me attempt to answer that question. I don't think you should or ought to negate drive-throughs. For instance, Shops of Legacy, we got 2 banks. I can tell you both the banks are paying over $50 a square foot for rent, and both of them have drive-throughs. You hardly ever see them. Probably don't even know they're there. But we designed them such so people get in and out very easily, and they're somewhat hidden. There is a donut place, a national donut chain that has a drive-through, Shops of Legacy. You may not see it, but it is there. And we've done it very, very tastefully. You can do it without having to be like McDonald's or Burger King or anybody else. Now, there are drive-throughs all over the city, and they're done. Some are done very well, some are done very poorly. The question is, you got to do it correctly and wisely. Again, it's a sense that you know design and know how to do the drive-throughs so people can get in and out quickly and still not be offensive. If that can be done, our intention is not to have a drive-through like a McDonald's. That is not the intention.
And it kind of goes back to the whole concept of a mixed-use development, right? 26 acres is not a lot of property. If you put, let's say, 2 drive-throughs on it, you just cannibalized like a huge percentage of your property. So I'm talking like just a regular, standard box McDonald's. Like, there's no place for a standard box McDonald's in this mixed-use development. It's not going to happen. You put a standard box McDonald's in there, we're not going to get all the other restaurants that we wanted. Because, that's why you don't find a McDonald's in the Shops at Legacy. They don't go together. So, you got to kind of pick one or the other. And we're certainly going not that direction of those types of drive-throughs. But if you want, some banks or some of these higher-end type of places that would require a drive-through as part of it, you might need to do that, or then you can't get that type of a tenant.
Well, I'll tell you where one of my concerns comes in on this. I happened to notice it the other day. You have a sign out there that says property for lease, pad sites available. Well, pad sites immediately tells me.
That's been up there for 15 years.
Okay, but now you're.
Not with that wording.
That sign's been there for 15 years.
Not with that wording.
Okay, well,
It's new. It is.
So we want me to take the sign down tomorrow? It's not, it's.
I don't know. I've been here all the time. It just happened to,
I think the way that the
trigger my.
property's zoned right now, I think it would allow an office pad, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
I believe so.
It's only zoned professional office, I think, I don't remember who said it earlier, but it's not zoned commercial right now.
Yeah, okay.
So only thing we can do is put office buildings on there right now.
I have a question on the drive-through topic. Looking at a dense development, how do you say you have a couple of drive-throughs, three drive-throughs, a donut shop, and a couple of banks. How do you utilize a drive-through in a multi-story development? And the reason I ask is because I went over and toured Legacy, Shops and Legacy, and if I remember right, some of those structures are single and two-story structures.
To answer your question, it's very difficult, and you do it very carefully. But 2 of them we built over the drive-through, the second floor.
Built
Right.
building above. Okay.
Exactly. And that's where you try to achieve. Drive-throughs and mixed use are very difficult to do because you're wasting a lot of land. You got stacking with cars and everything. So if I was telling Mr. Beck, I would not want to do any drive-throughs. But you do have the inevitable problem when Bank of America comes in and wants a 5,000 square foot space, wants to spend $60 a square foot, and spend $5 million in an interior finish out. Do you tell them no? Absolutely not. They're a great use. People use Bank of America. Hopefully they won't go out of business, and we'll all still be using them. But you want that tenant there. They're a viable neighborhood source. And then we had another Benchmark Bank is there also doing the same thing. It's a small local bank. They built over the drive-through also. So there's ways of doing it to achieve the process of mixed use that can be done very easily. But it's difficult. You have to design it very carefully.
I do just want to make a comment on that. The idea of the flexibility, right? When we're making these comments of 2 banks that are paying $50 or $60 a foot, when we start building this, it may not be banks anymore that want to pay $50 or $60 a foot, right? That was kind of the big craze that was going on, the past 10 years. The next big craze might be someone else that wants a drive-through for $50 or $60 a foot. And that's the essence. Maybe it's Fox Sports Grill. I don't know, but I think that's the whole point of having that flexibility.
Which gets back to what we said last time. We originally had a bookstore where Angelica Theater was. And then we spent $6 million on doing a legacy bookstore that lasted 6 months and it's out of business. Now Marriott Corporation put an office building there. Things changed very quickly. So there is a question of you got to be fast and flexible in achieving the times. Fox Sports Grill's out of business.
Yeah, that's true.
Commissioner Sheridan?
Because as I'm listening, Mike, you say you've talked to people that don't like drive-throughs, did they specify banks or did they specify
Oh, no,
McDonald's?
they said, the way this document is written, you can drive down Trophy Club Drive and have McDonald's and Burger King and Wendy's and,
No, I
a
understand.
series of
See,
drive-throughs.
I'm hearing fast food from you, and I'm hearing banks and some higher class operations
That's
from
what
them.
I
So
got
I'm
from.
hearing two different things.
That's what I was getting from citizens.
Whenever
That's
you
what I was trying to
say,
bring out.
yeah, whenever you say drive-through, I think you're right, Dennis. People are automatically thinking fast food.
I think a little bit too, you look at Chipotle. Well, a lot of people will consider Chipotle fast food. Well, Chipotle right now is one of the most successful businesses there is. They opened one in London just recently and one in Paris just recently. And they're looking at doing drive-throughs because they can't get a number of people parked. So do you want to run a Chipotle out of town because they can't have a drive-through? I don't know. I mean, that's the situation. Yeah, Starbucks is a good thing, example too.
And we did just change that zoning in the back.
Mayor, I was just going to, I guess, ask a question to Mr. Beck and his team. I think there's a perception in the town when you say the word drive-through, they immediately get the vision of the fast food place and the stacking at 10, 11 at midnight and the noise and the congestion that causes that. I think this can pretty easily be solved by putting a team together, and Scott had mentioned about development standards, and you can word in the development standards that drive the end use of what you're looking for, that allows enough flexibility to have the Starbucks or Chipotle's or whatever kind of comes in the future, and eliminates the, I guess, the don't wants. And I guess I'm not asking for an answer now, but would something in that type of a language be acceptable or wordable to your team?
We can draft that. Yeah, I think we could. I think it's a good recommendation.
Okay. And did anybody else?
No, we have just the one.
Okay. The next one was religious and educational. One of the big issues we have here in town is we have very little commercial property, and we've had a significant amount of that being sold to religious entities who pay no taxes. And we would like some assurance that that doesn't happen, because the whole point here is that we need this to be, a viable revenue source for the city. And I think we have enough.
I guess one of the questions as Steve we have is, if we have an office building that's very successful and they want to lease to an educational or religious group, are we not allowed to do that?
We're not allowed to prohibit its presence, however.
That's true. We're not.
In any zoning.
We'd just like to.
Well, actually, in our zoning ordinance, a religious institution is allowed in any zoning with a conditional use permit in certain zones. So we do have conditional use permits in some zones, and we could set that up in. It's a suggestion for this PD that if we leave religious in, we could put it as a conditional use.
So that would be a conditional use for a church use, but as Mike was suggesting, if there was a religious institution that wanted to use an office building for office uses, that...
Are they tax-free?
I don't have any idea, but we have a tenant right now on 300 Trophy Club Drive, no, on Indian Creek, the old cable building.
Right.
And there's a religious group
Yep.
in there right
Right,
now.
yeah, I know that.
They're part of the back office for might be one of the local churches, I'm not
It
sure.
is. It is.
So, I don't know if they're paying taxes or not. I mean, I know they pay rent, but I don't have any idea what they
No.
do on the other side.
They're leasing the building. If they're leasing the building, they're not the property owner, so
That's what I'm saying, so I don't,
it's a taxable event, as long
Right.
as, say, Beck Properties or some entity of Beck owns the property,
yeah, we pay taxes on the property, so I suspect you're still getting taxes for it. The city is.
Yeah, on a smaller use like that, I don't think it would matter. I think the council and P&Z is more concerned with if they were going to take over the entire office complex or the entire building. It became a different use, a change of use, really.
What you're recommending is putting a conditional use permit for a religious temple, synagogue, church, that kind of thing?
Yes, sir. It's an option to put into this PD that.
We don't have a problem with that at all.
And conditional use permit would achieve what we need?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Heliport. Mr. Hill, you had,
Just on the south boundary of your property is a very tall towered high voltage electric line crossing there. If you had a heliport on top of one of the buildings, prevailing south wind that they need to take off to the south, you're at a very, very high risk. That line is in Westlake, that is outside Trophy Club, but it still is in existence. And I think any effort to have a helipad on top of a building in there is going to be a high-risk venture. I can't see many pilots wanting to go in under those circumstances. So, you know, what really would be the necessity for having a permissible use as a helipad on a building in there?
We thought it would be an upscale addition to a development to have that kind of a feature on the property.
I
understand your point.
It would be a very high-risk situation trying to get one in there, in and out of there, with any regularity.
Prevailing winds are out of the southeast.
Yeah.
Yep.
But if you're, excuse me, Chairman.
Sure.
But if you're putting it on top of an 11-story building, you're going to be at equal to or above, plus the fact that to put a heliport, don't you have to have FAA approval?
Yeah,
And they're going to have
You're not
all.
going to get their approval anyways if there's a problem.
And you know, we are under the one of the runway landing zones. But the idea being is, in this, it may not go everywhere in this PD, but it could go somewhere, and it could be a high-end draw.
I think so.
Well, I mean, the other thing is in theory, right, if you had a user, you know, similar to, let's say, a Fidelity, right, who's across the street, right, and they decide that they want to have a 11-story building inside of this development. Obviously, Fidelity's already over there, but somebody like a Fidelity, right, they like this concept, there's going to be all these different things in there. There's enough multifamily or urban, what did you call it?
Residential.
Urban residential in the development that makes sense for them to locate their corporate campus inside of Trophy Club, and you know, they're willing to pay to bury the electrical lines. I'm just saying, I'm just throwing it out there, right? If that's an FAA issue, it's conceivable to say, I mean, be great for everybody, right? Now the electrical lines in the front of Trophy Club are buried. I'm not saying they would.
Over the gas pipeline that exists.
You never know. But
the one
It
thing
doesn't sound
about,
feasible, but actually, the W Hotel near Victory has a helipad on it.
the one thing, and I don't have a good sense of it for sure, but I have to say, the one thing that absolutely drove me crazy when they started the Speedway was the helicopters. I can hear the cars, I can hear everything, but those helicopters coming over here all day long, the race, is enough to drive you crazy. And so that, but I'm assuming if you're talking a helipad, it's something it would be like on a rare occasion, somebody, or,
Very rare.
Very rare, yeah.
you know, that's my concern, because I find helicopters very intrusive in it from a sound standpoint. I don't know how anybody else is.
And certainly be an indication of the quality of your urban residential.
Yeah, you got a point there.
Yeah, definitely upscale.
Mayor,
Okay.
if I could briefly. helipad, there are a lot of FAA design standards that go into placing one of those.
Yes.
And so I think that the high lines would not be a problem. They would be taken care of in the design standards. And if it got into a noise issue, then we can design particular approaches for the landing area to avoid the residential areas. So, I mean, all of those particular type things from a pilot's perspective can be.
Yeah, I think
I mean,
from all
if you
the
wanna get into
comments,
it.
you know,
Yeah.
we would be very happy to have the high-class problem of actually having a helipad
That's true.
on our 26-acre development, because it means we have a lot of commercial development, a ton of urban residential, and a lot of taxable revenue. So, you know, that would be a very nice high-class problem to have.
If he wants to mark off the top of the 10-story parking garage as a helipad, more power to him.
Right, exactly.
Okay. Okay, parking. I think no parking along Indian Creek. We basically agreed on that one
Yes.
already. Okay.
Yeah, I think that's already been changed.
Yes,
That
it
was
has.
one of the changes already made in the document. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Carolyn, was there something else on this that we needed, from the comments you received on the parking, that we needed to talk about?
There were a number of other comments on the parking. I think we can address those, though, when the Planning and Zoning Commission discusses this on the 20th.
Okay.
There were a lot of minor little things. I think we can clear those up on the 20th.
Okay. Okay. The next item is procedures, and I'm going to read the notes here. The developer's decisions and actions take precedence over town standard operating procedures. I think that's the comment that we received. Clarification is needed to understand the procedures and that they require more, not less, on the developer's part. Concurrent compliance, PD should not prevail over town ordinances. I guess that's a different issue, unless a higher standard than town ordinances. Okay. So I know we've had a lot of questions, and I think it's really important to make this very clear, and also that we understand it, and it is as we understand it. But the thing is that that we're trying to develop this whole concept with the framework and the guidelines, and then the staff, the developer would bring forth a plan, a specific plan, which then we would say, does this fit the guidelines that are spelled out? We're not we're not saying that the staff is making decisions to change anything. We are saying the staff is looking at the submittal and determining that it fits the guidelines we established. Did I say that correctly? Is that, I want to be absolutely sure, because that's
correct.
a really critical piece.
I used the analogy, Mayor, in our last meeting, not with you guys, but the workshop prior to our last council meeting of PD 27. You folks worked through PD 27, which is the Highlands development, and determined what it would look like and what the standards are and the development standards. And every day we get, this past year we got 229 permits for development, or housing development, that had to meet the criteria of PD 27. And that's what staff does. They take that, and it's the same process, in effect, on the commercial side that we're doing right now with PD 27. We're ensuring that all those components and all those provisions in PD 27 are met before we issue a building permit to go build another house out there. And that's why it takes, almost a month to get a permit out, because we're reviewing every one of those things to make sure it's in compliance. And that's exactly what we're talking about here.
And I think what it's also very important to understand is that when, like with the Highlands, we have the plan development. When the P&Z has looked at it, said yes, it complies with the PD. When it comes to council, we can look at it and question it, but legally, we could not turn that down. We don't have that. I mean, I want people to understand we're not changing, we're not absolving ourselves of responsibility. We didn't have that power before. We are required, if they have met all the requirements, to approve it. So I just want that to be clear, because, you know, we're not trying to give up or give in, but to make it just more workable. Carolyn, did I?
Mr. Chairman?
Mayor.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
All right. Commissioner Davidson.
Mayor, if I may, yes, you're absolutely correct about all that, and it should flow through that way, but that's why it's so important to get the PD right to begin with, because that is the document that we live by. So to be able to walk through that, even at the level of minutia that seems to be painful at times, that's where that comes in handy. Because like you said, if they meet all the criteria, it goes through, you cannot deny it. And that is absolute fact. So it was amazing to me to hear the comment that was made in the last meeting that said we had a 3-page document that defined the PD. I think it was for Legacy. I found that shocking, because how could, basically you had free reign to do almost anything that was within there, which was very broad, I'd have to assume. So the concern here, I think, with the council and the commission and the general town is that PD to us is what we have to live and die by as well. So it is important that we get it right. And I think we want to be cooperative to do that. So I don't want to lead on anything other than it just has to be right.
Chairman?
Commissioner Sheridan.
I don't want to disagree with it, because I still want to listen to everything that's said. If I understand, either from the last meeting or the prior meeting, Legacy is a very small document and allows the developer to do a lot of stuff with the staff approval and not go through the P&Z process. Am I correct in that assumption?
Yes, sir.
Okay. The PD for Legacy Town Center for 160 acres is 8 pages, and it's PD 65 CB1. And it has a developer has to submit a site plan that has to go through P&Z. That's according to the planning people today, this afternoon. So the site plan portion has not been delegated to staff as proposed in this property. The other example that was Waters Crossing up in Allen that was also used, and that's 63 acres, and that's PD 99, that's 24 pages. And I'm looking at that, and I'm really saying, that's pretty neat ordinance, and we got 88 pages. But the only thing in that development that's allowed to have the site plan or the concept plan is already part of the PD. It's already in there. The Director of Planning has minor amendment to the concept plan approval. Other than that, everything else has got to go through P&Z. So the essence of what we do right now is we created a document, a PD, and if a developer conforms to that PD, they still have to submit a site plan to the P&Z, and it has to go through town council. The one thing about Plano is that in Plano, their laws, the P&Z has site plan approval. It doesn't have to go to town council. We're not under that type of scenario, and other cities have the ability to make their changes. The third, an additional thing, and I'll end at this, is both Plano and Allen have large planning staffs. They have multiple technicians, they have multiple engineering in-house, and they have a director of planning. And anything I say about staff, please, I'm talking generic. I do not mean to say anything wrong to Carolyn. Carolyn and I have a good working relationship, and I appreciate her expertise. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else want to have a comment before we move on?
Okay.
Okay. And the concurrent compliance, we have to go through that one, do you think?
No.
Okay.
Well, that's pretty clear that the
All right.
PD should not prevail over town ordinances unless the PD has a higher standard than the town ordinances.
The intention is that the PD would be the zoning document for the development of the property. To the extent that there are other zoning regulations not addressed in the PD, those regulations would still obviously control. And this document does not and cannot change any regulations in any other document, such as the building code or subdivision regulations. So this is specifically just to the zoning entitlements.
Madam Mayor? Over the last couple of weeks, we did get a lot of comment about, the fact that this is a different process than the ordinary zoning process that others have gone through the P&Z and subsequently to the council. And Patricia, you may correct me, or we may have to research, but I do think that the council has the authority to delegate some authority to the P&Z. If that's, and I don't know how you guys feel as the development team about site plan approval. I know what the document says today, but would you be willing to consider P&Z approval of the as a middle ground? Would you consider the P&Z approving the various site plans coming forward as opposed to staff?
Sir, the P&Z would not have approval. We would have review authority, but the council still would have the approval. We have no approval
Right. I do think that there is some provision in the law that would allow them to delegate that approval to the P&Z. That's what I was asking Patricia.
Our ordinance is fairly specific, so we would need to change our ordinance in order to allow that, but our ordinance is fairly specific on how that
Can you
process
speak
goes
up?
and
We
the
can't
P&Z's. Sorry, I've got it right here. Is it working?
Yeah.
Our ordinance is fairly specific with regards to the P&Z authority. Chairman Hills is right in what it's saying, so it would require an amendment to our ordinance.
But with the language that's in paragraph 3, as an example, right up front, or I'm sorry, part 1, paragraph C, where it says, unless it's in conflict, this thing, or if this is in conflict, this document would supersede. How would that play out?
Well, it would have I'd want to look at the ordinance see what
Right.
the exact wording was.
I don't know that
see if
we're going
would
to get an
work.
answer tonight, but
Yeah.
I'm asking the development team, is that even a consideration if we were to bring that back to you?
No.
The audience couldn't hear the answer.
No.
No was the answer.
Can you expand on the no? I mean, I need to get a little better understanding of.
I'll just briefly say, but Mr. Polikoff has just gone through a similar situation with a much bigger piece of property in Richardson. And I think times are changing, and one of the problems in the whole process of getting site plans approved through P&Z, City Council, city processes is the lengthy amount of time it takes. And there are tenants now, and it's hard to believe, but there are tenants now that when they know they have to go through a planning, zoning, and city council issue, they won't even look at the project. They won't. They just flat won't look at it. I think Mr. Polikoff can probably lead you on better than I can, but I used to do all the planning, zoning, and city council for Tom Thumb. I did 51 Tom Thumbs around the state. And I did all the planning, zoning, city council cases. And there were many a time where Tom Thumb just finally walked away. As good as Tom Thumb was, as good as people they were, Jack Evans, mayor of Dallas, it was a tough process.
Excuse me, can you just speak up a little or closer to the mic? Thank you.
I think what's changing now is, and I think Mr. Polikoff can answer it better than I can, and through the city of Richardson have done it, and I think a few other cities have done it also, is that if we write an ordinance that is comprehensive enough that staff can say, yes, they're following the rules exactly the way planning, zoning, and city council agreed to it, that eliminates all the time schedules upon you, all of you, and the neighborhood also. that the staff can easily say, yes, this site plan meets everything that's in the ordinance. There's no questions about it.
And most importantly, the tenant,
Right.
right? So you don't, if it's in the document, we already know what can be done. So you can just start working with the tenant.
In any tenant. It assists the whole process tremendously. Now, we'll put a site plan in, preliminary site plan in, and if they have problems, they think they have problems, and we can't work it out, they will come back to you. That's in this ordinance also.
Yes, it is.
So it's not like you don't have a chance. If the staff says, oh, no, this doesn't work, and we can't agree on that it doesn't work, we'll come back to you and say, here's our problem. Otherwise, our site plan is going to follow this.
Mayor, my recommendation is the same as when we first talked about this, and that is the reason to have not 8 pages, but almost 80 is to do exactly what we're doing, so that the community's on notice at this stage, the market's on notice, Mr. Beck is on notice, and most importantly, your staff is on notice, that if a site plan and application for site development permit is brought in consistent with this document, then the market knows that you're going to move forward and develop. If it's not, then staff will bring it back, or they can ask for a modification of their zoning. I think Mr. Twitchell is absolutely correct. When we start to turn up the competition, as more than just multifamily becomes in demand and the development cycle starts again, maybe not in the rest of the country, but it's gearing up here, you will not be competitive, in my opinion, if the perception is that even if an application, even if a complete site plan and application for site development permit is brought in with a tenant in tow, that there's still the potential that for whatever reason, that site plan might not be approved for any other reason other than that it meets the intent and detail of this document, then I'm afraid that I think you may lose some opportunity that you don't want to lose. I feel pretty strongly about that. Now, having said that, it means that this is the time to roll up your sleeve and do the work.
Right.
And if you don't feel comfortable with it right now, then it's, you don't want to turn it over. So that's why we're here.
Right.
Do it right now, but then feel good about doing it right if you choose to do it that way. We did do this. We represented a private developer that was not a vertical developer on the 57 acres at President George Bush and Central Expressway, the old Hunt property, and then we worked with Larry Good and did the zoning ordinance for Larry Good on behalf of the Cruth interest on the other 50 acres, the 100 acres at the hard corner of the southeast corner of Central Expressway and the President George Bush with the dart line that sits in the middle of it. And we achieved a unanimous vote from the City Council and almost a unanimous vote from the Planning Commission for that structure, but we had excruciating detail that we worked out in the ordinance because everybody wanted that notice going forward, what was expected. And so I think you're sort of shooting yourself in the foot if you go through the process of doing this now and then you tell the market that there's still tremendous uncertainty, even if they bring something back that fits exactly what you've asked for.
I think it's, yeah, I understand. I think it's something we've talked about for a long time, the difficulty in getting good development because people have to go too far in the investment process before they can get approval, and that becomes even more difficult. I agree with you. Okay, can we I'll move on to the miscellaneous category. Street accessibility for public safety, police and fire. Carolyn, do you know what that question entails?
There were a couple of commissioners who had asked for some clarification on the street pattern within the development. And I'm not sure how we can address that, possibly with a little bit more detail on the concept plan.
We will have to comply with the public safety regulations, requirements, fire lanes, those standards. Like I said, this will not, this document will not affect those standards, those requirements.
That, I mean, very simply, we're going to have to meet the building codes, and your fire marshal will have to meet his demands. I think that solves that question real easily.
We want to also.
And we want to also. We want,
Well, yeah,
there's a
your
safety
insurance
factor.
rates would become.
Absolutely. We want a extremely safe project.
Okay. Did anybody have anything to add?
If I misinterpreted your comments, please let me know.
Okay. Muse, why new street nomenclature? We use the existing, and I'm not sure.
I've had a lot of questions about the definition for a muse.
It's just it's a European terminology, basically. You want to, instead of calling it a side street. It's not an alley, it's not a street, it's a small, more of a pedestrian.
Does automobile traffic use the Muse?
It can, yes.
Okay.
Yes, but it's not supposed to be dense at all. It's supposed to be just like, I don't know if you've been to Europe, but there are some streets that are barely wide enough to get a car through, and it's a Muse Street, it's what it is.
And they, and also would still have to follow any public safety requirements.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Typically, Muse Street is not going to be a fire lane.
Okay. All right. There was a request for more information for supplemental uses. The public right-of-way, incidental display, and sales and kiosks. There were a lot of references, Carolyn, maybe you can expand on, there were a lot of references like to kiosks, and I guess my question is, what do you mean by a kiosk? What are we referring to start with?
Mixed use brings upon many different things, and one of them is benches and landscaping, and when I say a little kiosk, it may be a possibility of a little temporary 10-foot by 10-foot structure there on a weekend someone may set up to sell items. It could be also, I've seen some of these displays, the round little displays, advertising displays that you're seeing around Dallas and other cities and a lot of the mixed use areas. You can have that too. Supplemental uses are just auxiliary uses that come along with mixed use that enhances the pedestrian feel of the project and also enhances the retail portions of the project also.
I think that bullet might go very well with the bullet if you're skip screening. I mean, you just kind of have to think about, you know, a dense mixed-use development is going to have a lot of different things than your standard strip center, right? And if you walk through, you know, West Village, you walk through Victory, downtown in Dallas, you walk through the Shops at Legacy, there's just different types of things. When you're walking, you know, down the pedestrian paseo, there's going to be a blade sign kind of hanging off the side of you know, the Gap, or whatever that case may be. That might not be appropriate for your standard strip center, like where Quiznos is, but it's very appropriate for something that's kind of off the street and just, you know, in more of a pedestrian mall type of situation. And so I think that's kind of, you know, if you read the ordinance in more of a vacuum, if you will, and you're not thinking more of a highly dense mixed-use development, maybe it seems strange to say, well, why would we put a kiosk in front of Quiznos out here on 114, or a blade sign? But when you're talking about, you know, several million square feet of mixed-use development that's highly dense, it makes a lot of sense. Merely for, you can get lost inside of a mixed-use development. So you need lots of signage to say, go down, you know, 20 feet this way, make a right and then a left to get to the men's restroom, right? Whereas when it's just kind of a huge open parking lot, it's a lot easier to see where you're going. So I think that's hopefully kind of answers both of those questions. And I think there's a description of a lot of those different things. There's pictures of kiosks and other things in the actual ordinance itself.
There's a large description for
I
it.
think a lot of people who think of the word kiosk, such as walking down inside a mall, such as in Louisville or in Grapevine, and they've got all these little jewelry sales and telephone sales and all those in kiosks in the pedestrian walkway. So that's a hard word to use when that relationship is in the minds of a lot of people.
But think about it on a separate note. If you're in this pedestrian mall, and it's 110 degrees outside, right? And there's a Pachugo ice cream on the inside, on one side of the property, which is, let's say, at the corner of 114 and Trophy Club Drive, right? On the back side of the property, at Indian Creek and Trophy Club Drive, for that particular weekend, right? Because maybe we have some kind of spritzer fountain that the kids can run and play in, right? They actually put up a little kiosk with Pachugo that they're selling off of the kiosk, right? In a mixed-use development, that makes sense, right? We're not talking about building something where we have like cell phone vendors selling, kiosk tchotchkes in it, or putting like, a big inflatable monkey or something, on top of the building. I mean, you kind of have to, think in terms of a mixed-use development, in terms of what would make sense inside of that. And I guess in theory you could, to Scott Polikoff's point, write some more definitive language with regard to that, but certainly that's the intent.
But if this were built today, and I owned a piece of property there, I would want to put a kiosk that sold the new iPhone 4.6 or 4S, whatever it is, and leave it there for 30 days. I don't see any problem with that.
You're saying
What
if you were me or if you were you?
It's just a point of sale. And you're going to only put that out there if there is interest, somebody's making a decision to go to the expense to put that out there, to man it, to make money. And so I don't have a problem with it.
But in that particular circumstance, I mean, in terms of keeping with the design elements and the fact that we'll own the entire property, it would be on a case-by-case basis whether or not we would allow somebody to actually have that kiosk out there. So, and that's one of the great things about, when you look at Shops at Legacy and it all being owned by one common ownership. I think it might be two now, right? two common ownerships now, but that work tremendously in conjunction with each other. They control those things. The lights that they put up every Christmas, they put them up themselves. Before the city even gets to fixing something on the streets, they're making sure that it's fixed. I mean, it's those types of things and the sense of control that you have to have in terms of that mixed-use development when you're in an urban environment. It was the same thing that we had to do when we were managing Hogan's Glen, because, we'd get 15 phone calls because the little drip hole coming out of the garden wall had a little bit of dirt underneath it, and nobody's waiting for the guys who mow the lawn to come back and spray the wall. Like, you have to go out there and spray it yourself, right? And it's the same thing that's going to happen in this mixed-use development. I mean, our tenants are going to demand a certain level, which is going to be significantly higher than anything that you guys could write in an ordinance anyways, in terms of keeping those tenants there. Otherwise, we're not going to get $50 or $60 a foot. It's not going to ever happen. And it's the same thing that goes with these kiosks. So, a moment of need for a weekend on an iPhone 4S because it's launching this Friday and you can get it, yeah, maybe for a week, but certainly not to have, the $9.99 gummy things that go on the outside of every type of iPhone gadget that you could think of. I don't think that would have a place.
In a sense, what I'm hearing is that this document, done correctly, protects your investment as well as ours.
I think so, because to some degree it allows us to be able to turn to the tenants and say, that's not permitted in the document.
Yeah.
It's not permitted, that's not what it was intended to be to begin with. So, yeah, absolutely. I think, and, that's why we spend a lot of time kind of going back and forth with staff to try to craft something that that would be appropriate.
Carolyn, did
Yes, ma'am, if I may. I just want to point out that I really do like where the developer and his team are going with this. This is something that's very different for you to consider because in the PDs we have currently, the existing PDs, any use like this, outside sales of any type like this, would not be allowed without coming back before the Planning and Zoning Commission and Council for approval. And we are putting it into the document that this can be done without having to bring it back before you. We get these requests all the time from our businesses. I think it's important for this development moving forward to allow this, but we want to make sure you're comfortable with what is allowed. And one of the things that was of a concern here was where these would be located, would they interfere with the pedestrian traffic of the shopping center? And I think I'm hearing the developer say that he'll be very cognizant of that and make it work. And we'll be watching that as well. But I hope this is something that you will consider, because with this high-density use, I do think that we have to allow some of these supplemental uses and some of the signage that he is requesting.
did somebody have a question?
Commissioner Davidson.
Mr. Beck, one question I have here, we're going to the trouble to write this PD. I think it's a great thing to do, obviously, otherwise we wouldn't be putting this time into it. But I keep hearing things that seem to conflict with one another just slightly. On one context, we talk about the development of how it sits today, in other words, building it up, how it needs to flow, and then you're going to have something built. It's done. Then on the other hand, I see the PD addressing the uses within that development. And I think part of the consternation that we have here is that I think the town and commission and council is saying, we want to have a say in what it looks like when you build it, but then once it's done, how you end up using it internally is, I'm interpreting that we're handing control back over to you to say, now you're going to determine what happens. Okay, maybe retail doesn't work on the second floor. That's a bad idea. We need to put business space in there. Or maybe we need a little bit more residential. Let's change that around. But the facility, for all practical purposes, is complete, and it doesn't really change. Is that a fair assessment of this, or am I off base?
I think it's a hybrid, but go ahead. You can, the architect can basically answer that.
Let me just I hate to bring it back to legacy, but I'll go back to legacy and just the evolution. I keep saying that word also. You guys are probably tired of me hearing evolution and flexibility, but I can't tell you, we just finished the second phase of North Side where the big fountain is. You probably heard about the fountain they spent $1 million on, okay? Half the tenants have gone in 2 years, literally left. Williams-Sonoma's gone. And what replaced Williams-Sonoma is Capital Grill and Legacy Bank. Natuzzi left, and another restaurant went in. Things are changing and evolving all the time. Now, Mr. Davidson, you're not going to put, if you put in tenants that are worse than what you had before, your project's going to go downhill fast. So the developer is going to look at those spaces and look at those choices and his opportunities, and he's going to fill them with people who are usually better than what they were before. Otherwise, this project's going to go downhill quick. And that's what you see in Legacy and what you see in West Village and other places. When those places either go out of business because they just weren't doing their business correctly, or if it's a restaurant and his business is just tough, they're going to be filled with other tenants who are better business people.
I completely understand that, and that's why I'm trying to delineate between pre and post build. In other words, once you have Legacy built, you intended to have tenants A and B in there. They both bail after a year or two. You still have a facility to deal with. To have new tenants come back through and go through the entire process, I get that. If you go to staff and say, I'm an accepted use, it's in the PD, move on. That's the end of it. And that's what you're trying to speed up that part.
I think your description is accurate.
Okay, so for that piece of it, I think there's pretty much agreement there. It makes sense to me that if the space already exists and it's a permitted use, there shouldn't be any consequence, because we've already determined that even if someone came to us and said, I have this specific use that I want, and we look in the PD and it's there, and today it would go to P&Z, we review it and we say, yep, that's a permitted use, looks good to us. We move it on to council. Council says, yep, everybody says it's great. They can't deny it anyway, but we added 30 to 60 days to the process. So it doesn't make sense. You've just delayed everything. That's not good. So I wanted to try to separate the post-build from the pre-build.
Yeah, so the only delineation I'd make is that once the PD is in place,
It's there.
yeah, the pre and post are pretty much the same.
Yeah. Yeah.
Based on how the document's currently drafted.
Understood. And the comments that come in, it's interesting to hear we want it to look a certain way as you're building it, and then we want it to behave a different way after you build it, or in a consistent fashion. So it's easy to trip ourselves up as we're looking at this and making it more difficult than it needs to be. So I'm supporting what you're saying.
Okay.
Okay, I don't want you to take it as me being negative. This is a positive comment, but it's to provide context to what we're looking at here. So when we start talking about Muse, well, that's kind of a permanent piece. So that's important when you do the build. After it's there, it's there. We'll never talk about it again. But
To one degree, I mean, when you talk about a Muse, let's say that Muse is, in front of a restaurant, right? There is delineations in here, for example, for valet parking. It's something that, so through staff approval, the document is set up where we have the ability, instead of having to go through an entire planning and zoning and city council process in order to change actual parking spots, to then make them into valet parking because we want to put a higher-end restaurant in, right? We wouldn't have to go through a whole process again. We'd merely be able to go to staff and get approval.
Agreed.
So there are some nuanced pieces that don't necessarily fit the model that you just described in terms of what you were saying. But I think
Fair enough.
99% of that is correct.
the other point that I want to make that I think is relevant here is that the PD is a double-edged sword. So as you put this together, as we put this together, you have your permitted uses. And if somehow or another a tenant comes to you and says, hey, I'm a permitted use, because the permitted use says shops, it's approved. We can't deny it. You can't deny it.
Well, we can deny it.
Well,
It's the owner.
you go back to the PD and say it's allowed. Now you got a problem.
No, we own the property.
I understand. I understand, but, it's not the kind of thing that you want to get yourself into necessarily. You got to protect yourself. So I'm just saying the PD is there to protect not only the town of Trophy Club, but also the owner.
You're correct.
Yes.
So,
Commissioner Rackert, you had,
Well, just on the Muse, it's not clear yet on the Muse Street. Is that public or private? As to ownership, I'm saying now.
It can be either, which gets back to the discussion of whether we're going to have public drives in the middle of this project. I mean, we can. Just to go back to Legacy, all the drives there at Legacy were actually built by EDS at the beginning. They were built by EDS. The city of Plano owned them, but the developer maintains them. It's a weird deal, okay?
The city owns them?
But, well, let me tell you why. If there's a problem in the pavers or anything in the street, they don't want to wait for the city to maintain it, so they just do it themselves. So they just kind of evolve that way. So the question is, when we've talked about this, what do we do? I mean, and that's another discussion for another time. But to answer your question about Muse Street, I think a Muse is just a term. It's a European term that probably we can change to a side street or something like that. That's all it means.
Yeah, unfortunately, if you look it up online, it says it's a street between two rows of stables, but.
That's right. Yeah, that gets back to the European term, which.
In the 17th century.
Yeah, exactly right.
Well, Mayor, if I could, stepping back a little bit, when we first got involved on your behalf, on the town's behalf, one of the things that we asked Mr. Beck's team to do was to actually indicate some characteristic of the connectivity and the internal street and block pattern their original concept plan was just a blob, and they responded very favorably and began to put in what you now see, which is some performance standards for connectivity. And I think the term used really indicates what they're trying to achieve internally as a pedestrian environment. Streets that have a balance, that they're not just for moving cars. And what Mr. Beck has described really is something that I think would be a sign of success. Congestion, having to use valet parking, slow speeds because you've got a lot of people moving around. And, you know, Mr. Twitchell has obviously a legacy over at his project, legacy that he showed you. And the thing that makes that a great place is that when you're walking through there, you actually feel like you have the priority as a pedestrian in the middle of that, what's really emerging as an urban neighborhood. And so I think this document did a good job of responding to our request, because what we were concerned about was that it would just become another retail center, where the main dominant factor with regard to the transportation was getting cars in, parking them, and getting them out. And I think this document doesn't represent that. I think what this document represents is a very careful balance. So I think to the extent that that part has been undertaken, I think Mr. Beck's team has done a good job responding to our request in that regard.
Yeah. Mr. Record, do you have anything further? No. Mr. Sheridan, did you add?
In the legacies, when the change of use occurred, was there any exterior reconstruction, any change of the site plan?
Absolutely. With site plan, very rarely, the exterior use, a great deal.
So the exteriors were, the facades?
Yes.
Were changed?
Yes.
Okay. But
those
rarely
typically-
would the site plan be changed?
Occasionally, we would do that for patios or for valet parking.
Okay, for the supplemental use of going from an office to a restaurant or something
Exactly.
like that, which you've got the outside?
Yes.
Okay. And right now, under our normal operating procedure, and I'm thinking the Tom Thumb Shopping Center, I'm sorry to bring that in. Okay.
It's okay. I like them.
If a use came in that was part of the, permitted use, that doesn't come to P&Z, that doesn't come to Town Council.
That's
Now-
correct.
Now, but if they wanted to change the facade?
That would
That would.
require.
All right, so
yes.
there's a differential for what we're trying to consider now for that. Thank you.
Just to clarify that, if they wanted to change the facade from what the PD says,
Correct.
or still within the PD?
Well, from the site plan that was approved by you when the Tom Thumb Shopping Center was built, if they want to change the facade from that, it would require going back to P&Z, coming back to P&Z and council.
Okay.
For a site plan, a change to the site plan, a revision to the site plan.
Okay.
If I could, Mayor, just to clarify, if the change to the facade met the PD standards, there would not be a requirement to come back, correct?
Correct, but most changes to a facade are going to require coming back before P&Z and council. With the way the PD is written for our shopping centers right now, most of them do have to come back before P&Z and council, even with minor changes.
Okay. But if our document was written correctly, it would not necessarily require that.
The
Yes, sir.
document as
Right.
it states right now does not require that. I think Commissioner Sheridan was pointing out a key differentiator between the two. Yeah.
It would have to go to staff. Number one, it would go to the developer, and hopefully the developer's architect, and they go, that looks good. To be honest with you, that's what happens. We actually look at signage and the elevations that tenants will come up with. We approve them, then they go to the city. The staff approves it also.
I think the key is commensurate with a mass mixed-use development is a mass amount of capital infused into building this.
Yes.
So the last thing you want to do is take a good facade and turn it into a bad facade, right? Or put in tenants that are going to effectively erode the value. So, I mean, it's, again, back to what Commissioner Davidson, is that right? Davidson said, was that, once we get past the actual building phase, we're all on the same team. I mean, really all on the same team. Right now there might be this perception, which we're not, when in reality we are anyways. But certainly once it's built, then all we want is it to truly be, best in possible use at all times.
If I may, I think there are two things in discussion here. One is standards, and the other is procedures.
Right.
And so once we get on the same game plan on both of those, I think we should move forward fairly quickly. And here again, standards are going to differ even amongst those of us sitting at the dais. So.
Okay. All right. The next item is screening of rooftop equipment. Additional screening needed for adjacent residential. Carolyn, do you want to just explain to us what the questions were there?
I can answer that. That's not a problem.
We'll draft that.
Oh, okay.
The concern was height of buildings, and if they were lower, then would they be screened from the adjacent residential? And that was just answered, which is great.
Yeah.
The last thing we want to do is have a project with a bunch of air conditioning units, ugly things shown on that people can see. That's not going to happen.
Great.
I think Councilmember Rose kind of most appropriately put it, which is the angle of the building in terms of where it sits is going to dictate what needs to be screened, and certainly all of those things are going to be screened.
Right.
Okay, great. Signage. The question, granting this PD far more than allowed by other businesses. Is it unfair to the existing businesses? Banners, projecting blades, hanging signs, and super graphics.
And this is something that you need to consider, as Mr. Beck said, the density of this project. Signage is going to be required to allow people to see what is there. There could be a lot of small stores in little nooks and crannies, and how do you get to them? How do you find the restroom? Signage is needed, and so there is a lot more signage allowed for this PD than other PDs. We have to be comfortable with allowing that in this document.
One thing you've mentioned a number of times about the focus on pedestrian, and I personally think that when you're focusing on pedestrian, you have to have signage. I mean, I keep walking up to these places that I don't have any idea what the store is because the sign's way up there on the awning or something. So, I mean, I think that's part of what you're referring to. Did anyone?
If I could touch briefly on signage. I don't know if you're familiar with the Domain. I think it's down in, that's in Austin, a new development going in.
Yes.
And a few straight views of signage down there. My indication would be too much when I look at a street and see 65% signs and 35% building. It's overdone. But here again, we can get to the signage and the details.
I mean, quite frankly, I think a nice balance is exactly what you see at Shops at Legacy. I think West Village did a nice job with that. Look, you got to kind of be cognizant of the community as well. I mean, this is a residential-based community, so you want to do what's tasteful inside of the community, and I think that's part of what we'll be doing also during our charrette process. Post-zoning, once we know kind of what can be approved, we start doing our massings and have discussions with town residents and what have you, and to try to get a lot of that feedback.
Anybody else?
Thank you.
Gene?
Anyone else over here? No.
Okay. Landscaping, trees should not be placed in the middle of sidewalks. That was in one of, and additional landscaping needed for this site. Tree and landscaping seems skimpy. And I noticed that some myself. We said in the document that hardscaping could be landscaping. So in a way, it says you don't have to have any plants. Yeah, there are trees, okay, but plantings, because it sounds like it can be all hardscaping, and maybe I didn't read it correctly.
That's in there.
That's not the intention. And I think if you have any mixed-use development, especially in Texas, you better be landscaping very, very well. Otherwise, you're going to be fooling the public and fooling the residents. So I think if you look at Legacy and you see what happens there, that's the intention here. Now, that being said, we took full advantage of removing or balling up trees from J.C. Penney's property. We had 30 or 40 or 50 trees that are 10, 12-inch diameter, and we had instant success down Bishop Drive. Can we do that here? I don't know, but we actually have some trees that we'd be ignorant to ignore. If we can get them in the landscaping where we want them, we're going to keep them. Those trees are very valuable.
The comment that was made as it relates to trees should not be placed in the middle of sidewalks, I would say that the exact opposite in a mixed-use development. You know, again, going back to kind of sociologically, psychologically, people when they go to those type of developments are expecting to not be in a mall environment where there's distance between each person as you pass. You're expecting to touch and bump shoulders with each other. You're expecting to have to stand behind the tree as one person walks around and then you walk around the tree. Now that doesn't mean that you still have room to actually get, you know, strollers by and other things like that, a wheelchair. Obviously everything's have to be ADA accessible, but it's those types of elements that actually make the environment successful. And so I would say, again, that's quite the opposite. I think you need that kind of thing.
I think one of the intentions we try to achieve as designers is when you walk down, hopefully you walk down the street, you think you're walking in London or France instead of Texas. That you're really walking on a street that wasn't developed 6 months ago, that's been there for 30 or 40 years, and it's a pedestrian environment that's quite different. You don't want to feel like you're in Texas. You want to feel like you're somewhere else. That's when you get the essence of a great mixed-use project. When you have the essence is, I've been walking down somewhere that's been here a long time.
If I could offer one observation, just from our experience that I think you're familiar with, after we did the master plan for Oak Street in Roanoke and did the rezoning, now granted, this is a city-initiated rezoning on behalf of multiple property owners, but the only way we were able to achieve what we achieved is we had to create effectively a master developer context across multiple owners by creating that single entitlement across different property ownership. When Half came in, the design firm that ultimately did Oak Street, and they used the cross-section and the plan view, the design that we developed in our master plan, I sat down with the engineer from Half with every property owner down Oak Street, and we literally placed the street trees and the ADA transitions. And now I think this is what Mr. Beck's talking about. You've got to be very, very careful that we don't try and prescribe out the creativity of making sure that it works literally shop front to shop front. And so that's the point at which I think the town you should feel comfortable letting go. They're not going to mess that up, just the opposite. If we're too prescriptive.
That's where we're probably going to spend most of our time.
Right, right. And because those tenants are not going to lease that storefront space, ultimately, if it's not going to work. And to have doctrinaire prescriptive standards and a one-size-fits-all approach at that level is going to take Mr. Twitchell's creativity away, and then it'll be counterproductive.
And I can honestly say this, with the new ADA regulations, there are tremendous problems of trying to get just slopes correctly, stairs, ramps, 5-foot wide accessible aisles everywhere. That gets into the sidewalks. I can do this in Legacy. We had many drawings on the sidewalks. We did the buildings. So, and we adapted many a time over and over again with tenants too, and getting patios and so trees are spaced pretty carefully a lot of times. Yeah. And a lot of times we'll add trees for patios depending on tenants. So it's again, gets back to flexibility.
Okay.
May I ask a question?
Certainly.
Are we finished with all those landscaping? Okay, I just have one question. What excites you the most about this opportunity?
Number one, the owner.
The what?
The owner. I think he's willing to commit to a project that's first class. Number two, it's a piece of property that's been paid for. That's in today's terms, that's unbelievable. It really is. You ought to be very fortunate about that. He's got the flexibility to go out there because he didn't have to pay money on the building. He didn't have to go to a bank and answer to a bank or whatever. He can go out there and find the tenants he wants. And number two, working with you all right now, because this is, you guys in Ms. Pollacott, this is unheard of. You're very you're very smart in doing something like this. It allows the flexibility, because there are tenants, I promise you, tenants will walk away from projects right now. They don't have the freedom that you all are going to give on this project.
Do you want to answer that question too?
I would appreciate the kind words, and you know, I think it harkens back to the first thing I said, is that, you know, this is the not only the crown jewel of Trophy Club, but it's the crown jewel of the development that we've been working on for the past 18 years since my father purchased it, out of bankruptcy, and you know, we've got my uncle's name is on the garden wall in Hogan's Glen. My great-grandfather's name, Samuel Beck, is on the school that we donated. So, I mean, this is not something that we take lightly. I mean, we want to make it into, a world-class development. And as I mentioned, it's exciting. It's exciting for me to be involved in it. As we get the property zoned and can start working on it, it's something that both my brother and sister are going to be involved in. As we move through the project, and it's going to take time to develop it and develop it right. But fortunately, we have the time. To Mike's point, because there's no debt on the property, so we can do it right. And get it right as we go through the process.
I'd just like to follow up with one comment regarding that. I just think it's real important, Mr. Beck, because I know that I'm relatively new to the town. But I just think it's real important for you to continue to be forthcoming to the town in terms of your commitment, and it sounds like stuff that I've never heard before, in that you do have a vested interest, far more than maybe most of us can understand. And so I just think it's really important for you to continue to share with us your intent, your investment, your want, your vision, and your desire for Town of Trophy Club that is consistent with our vision, as Mayor White would say on the wall up there, our strategies, who we are, what we want to be, and how we're going about doing that. So that's what I would just say to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to change a little bit from what I said earlier. What I'm going to do is take a short break. Right now, we've been sitting up here for 2.5 hours, so we're going to take a short break, and then I'm going to, since we've gone through all the summary issues, I think we've tackled a lot of the issues. We want to get into the document, but I'm going to allow the citizens' comments right after our break. Okay? We'll call the meeting back into session. Before we start, would you like to give us an update on the other important events happening this evening?
I didn't. This is totally unexpected. You didn't tell me you were going to tell me that. But for those of you who don't have smartphones, the Rangers won in the bottom of the 11th. Nellie Cruz hit a grand.
Who hit it?
Nellie Cruz hit a grand slam in the bottom of the 11th.
Home run.
She should have been.
Cruz.
I know. With that stupid rain.
Grand slam.
Okay. Okay. Just know it'll be a lot more pleasant for me.
And while I'm saying that, let me at least, I feel horrible that Carolyn is here tonight, but just as a testament to her professionalism and her commitment to this community, she had seats at that game, and you see where she's at.
Oh, no.
You deserve a raise, Carolyn.
Thank you.
You mean another one?
It's amazing. All the hours you put in, it's not anything but that made it. Okay. The first speaker we have is Susan Edstrom, and Jody Ashby is giving her minutes to Susan Edstrom. So, Chief, can you note that?
Can I put this down for short people? Okay. Good evening. My name is Susan Edstrom, and I live at 269 Oak Hill Drive, and I'd like my remarks to be made a part of the public record. And rather than rewrite them, try to rewrite them from my seat, I'm going to write them as I read them as I wrote them last night. So I'd like to address several specific items related to PD 30. I was initially concerned about the lack of desire to allow P&Z to do a thorough review of this document. They're an independent commission, and the job you task them with is to review items like this and make a recommendation to you. It appears to me that a few weeks ago, the desire to meet a date in November was more important than a thorough review. I understand that meeting is no longer the goal because it was never really realistic in the first place, since P&Z only received this document about a month or so ago. I want you to let P&Z do their job and conduct a thorough review of that document. I'm opposed to the use of super graphics and signs that allow for 800 square feet per side. Now, for those of you who don't know what a super graphic is, I certainly did not. This is a representation of a super graphic. So you'll see the hotel on the right-hand side with a super graphic imposed over it. Anybody can Google it. There were 7 or 8 different, you just Google super graphics and those are the pictures that come up. What this points out is that the document has a way to go before approval. A November goal would have never allowed the appropriate time to give this the review it needs, and I think this item is representative of one of the concerns your P&Z chairman alluded to at your last session. I'm opposed to no limits on multifamily apartment type of structures. I'm opposed to surface facilities for gas wells. Now, I had this in, I crossed it out, and I put it back in because, quite frankly, your conversation confused me. I'm opposed to staff having all right of approval once passed. There needs to be clear delineation of what can and cannot be approved by staff and what must come back for review, not only by P&Z, but by the residents. Talked about council and P&Z a lot, but I think the residents need to be able to see some of those things too. There can be too many changes to staff, P&Z, and council, and your known desire to change P&Z members, and I firmly believe that some things should see the light of day and not be approved behind closed doors. 2 specific items where there were errors, omissions, or issues with staff approval. One would be the sign at Value Place. The other would be the buffer in the Highlands that still exists and still hasn't been corrected to date. As stated by several of you, there has to be an SUP, and I know that you've concluded that, but I wanted to make sure that my reason for noting that is that I didn't want to become known for the most liquor stores per capita instead of the most park space per capita. I'd like to make sure special attention is paid to the drainage and flow of water from the property across Indian Creek. I think the permitted uses for this property need to be reviewed. If indeed your desire is in sales tax revenue, you won't find that with many of the uses, including a drive-through bank. I'm concerned about comments from council members who are not versed in this process that P&Z and council are getting into the minutia. You've got one shot at this, and if it isn't done right, you will not get a chance to do it again. And Mr. Hoover, I'm most concerned about your comment, and I quote, "I'm prepared to let it ride if I have a commitment from you that you're not going to fight overruling any decision they, P&Z, make with regard to the PD. Shouldn't you be more concerned about understanding their concerns rather than disregarding them?" I'm concerned about inflammatory comments made from our town manager about the current process being cumbersome and the developer somehow being inconvenienced. I've had an open records request in for several weeks to give me examples, and thus far, none have been produced. There has been no submission that has been delayed as a result of our planning and zoning processes. I'd like Mr. Slide to also provide me detail. There was an item in the last workshop, I listened to the tape thoroughly, about a concern with a change of a tree from an oak tree to some other type of tree. Give me the example of where that occurred. It didn't. It was an inflammatory exaggeration. I'd like you guys to slow down. This is the second item that was attempted to be rushed through before the appropriate items were in place, and I don't like the pattern. Lastly, we need to make sure that the clock tower is not destroyed. None of you have talked about that tonight. The clock tower was built with EDC and resident funds and was to be the entrance to that development as designed by John Harbin. May he rest in peace and watch over this process. You need to protect that structure. I'm not opposed to commercial development. I'm opposed to the way our current processes have been usurped, our P&Z left in the dark, and insulted by a council member. Let's take a collective deep breath and get this done right, not fast. And I look forward to seeing and watching the progress. Thank you.
Chris Clark.
My name's Chris Clark. I live at 11 Palmetto Court here in Trophy Club. I wanted to step back and give a little perspective that I haven't heard now or over the last several weeks regarding this development. First of all, I think it's exciting. I think this is the first time in 28 years I've lived here that somebody's actually going to develop something. So I congratulate you. I think that's exciting. On the other hand, this town was formed to control development. It's the only reason it was incorporated was to control development. So I think it's inherent upon the council and P&Z to control this development very, very closely. Next, I really miss John Harbin. John Harbin would have given us a view of what this concept would be like. We'd be seeing slides, pictures of what the concept of this whole town entrance is going to be. I haven't seen that. I've looked at 89 pages on the internet, and there's nothing in there that tells me what this is going to look like. I think we're working backwards. Instead of doing all this detail, I think we ought to have a concept first and then do the detail on it. And lastly, again, in deference to Mr. Beck and his property, things do change. Right now in Hogan's Glen, there's a development going on that the $1 million homes aren't real appreciative of, because the extension to Hogan's Glen is not going to be $1 million homes. There are other examples in Trophy Club where things have not necessarily worked out the way they should have. So I think it's really, really important to think about not just that this is a jewel, but it's the entrance to Trophy Club, and we ought to be thinking about how it's going to draw 13,000 people into it as opposed to providing something new for somebody else. For instance, I met with John Harbin before he passed away, and I met with Mr. Beck, as a matter of fact, and I said what this town needs is a gathering place and have a war memorial built so that on July 4th or other memorial days, we could go and act as a town in a village square. They both agreed that was a marvelous idea. I haven't seen that kind of a concept presented for the front entrance of Trophy Club, where we bring the town together as opposed to making it just a commercial development. Thanks for listening to me. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Sean Weaver.
Good evening. My name's Sean Weaver, and I live at 109 Inverness Drive here in Trophy Club. And actually, the big news tonight is TCU accepted the invitation to the Big 12. So, being a alumni and former member of the football team, that's big news to me. I just wanted to come in here, kind of give a bit of perspective. My family's been in Trophy Club since the late 70s, and my wife and I moved here a few years ago. We have a heck of an opportunity here with the owner developer expressing his interest in the acreage that's there at 114 and Trophy Club Drive. While the opportunity is presenting itself, we need to come together and find a responsible way to develop that piece of property. There's been a lot of fear and uncertainty about the possible development of that tract, and rather than digging in and fighting each other, we need to find a way to come up with a plan and a document that responsibly develops that clock tower property. I think Mr. Polikoff here is giving us the answer. People seem to be skimming over the top of it, that we can put in words and standards in there that keep some of the things that everybody is so concerned about out of that, and the developer seems not to be so concerned about that. But in the end, we have a decision to make. Develop the property and possibly lower our tax rates, and see that, or fight them and not have it developed and see our property taxes stay the same and in all likelihood rise as continued development of properties help or grow here in homes here in Trophy Club, and the infrastructure of the town has more and more demands on it. Please don't understand my position here. I'm willing to pay a higher tax rate in a town like Trophy Club. That's why I moved up here with my wife and family. I've even received disapproving looks. And Mayor, your comment about the Taco Bueno, I'm sorry, that's why I moved to Trophy Club, so I don't have to drive past that every day. And I'm willing to pay a little bit more to live here for that. However, while willing to pay a little bit higher taxes, I would prefer to move that tax burden to developers and sales tax and things of that nature. It just needs to be done responsibly. That's why we need to make sure we get this PD 30 document right. It's our one chance to get it right there at the front of the property. So please, let's quit the divisive tactics, the negativity, the negative emails, and let's come together and figure out a way to get this done and get it done to where we can all be proud of what's at the front of our town, and that we can go and take our friends and neighbors to a restaurant or something there at town and say, I had a part in getting this developed. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Christina Perlman.
Good evening, Trophy Club Planning and Zoning, Your Honor, and Town Council. My name is Christina Carey Perlman, and I live at 6 Hamper Court in Hogan's Glen, and I love Trophy Club. We keep talking about doing the right thing, but I know in the past a lot of things haven't been done right. I would like this site plan of our town to be placed in our records, and I'd like to pass a few of them around to show what I have observed over the years. If you could pass a few of these. I don't have enough for everyone, I'm sorry. I made 10 of them. What the map is showing is 114. It shows our fire department. It shows where our building is, and it also shows where Indian Creek is. Also, in the blue area, it shows where lakes are. And in this 26 acres, this lake is no longer there. And I want to ask you if any of you know where it went. And I can answer that. About 6 or 7 years ago, this lake or wetland, whatever you want to call it, was filled up using truckload after truckload of dirt. I watched it happen over several weeks. Soon after, rainfall caused the fill dirt to run off and drain into Hogan's Glen's lake, starting at our entrance. This runoff of sediment from the landfill, which again was once a lake, caused severe environmental impacts. As a result, at least one of the homes in Hogan Glen has flooded with over $30,000 worth of property damage, and the sediment buildup has filled our lake, costing the residents a special homeowner assessment for dredging that cost us thousands of dollars. Today, this project has not been completed due to the severity of the built-up. I'm asking the town council and the town staff to exercise due diligence in investigating using environmental studies with the EPA and the Corps of Engineers before voting on PD 30. I would like the information to be disclosed to the town of Trophy Club residents of your findings. I guess my 3 minutes is up.
Yeah. Thank you. Mark Bartels. That's you. Dick Swetnam.
Hey, baby. My name's Dick Swetnam. I live at 5 Palmetto Court here in Trophy Club, and I've been a resident for 16 years. And I appreciate you having the citizens' input at this time, because I may not have made it a little later. But anyways, I enjoyed the interaction, and I can appreciate both sides of the situation. I want to try to ask you to listen real briefly to the citizen side. Mature, I use that instead of old. It's you know, kind of like I'm not fat, I'm fluffy. But it's a situation that I think it's really imperative, because Mr. Beck and the legacy he's had here with his family and so forth, and then our job, and of course in the modern development world, is weighing where Trophy Club has been, and then fitting in some a situation where you can maximize the development and also realize benefits, and that's a win-win situation. From the citizen standpoint, I recall not long ago when we had the barbecue down here next to the 7-Eleven, and the thing when I retired, and I've worked with boards, and I've been superintendent of schools and dealt with a lot of volatile situations, architects, planning, citizens, tax hearings, the whole thing. And there's 2 or 3 things I want to bring out. First of all, I remember he couldn't put a neon sign up in his window to announce to people going on 114 that there was a barbecue there. And of course, he didn't stay there very long. So, but the reason I came here is because of the strictness and not emulating communities. You know, I thought Trophy Club was unique. And I hope we continue to try to do that instead of emulate other areas. And certainly as a developer, I can understand of why you wouldn't want to go through the bureaucracy of an Allen or a Plano, but we're not in that situation. We know each other, and you know that quite well also. And I want to say this to the council. Don't apologize about overseeing things. The fiduciary responsibility that you have, it rests with you. And you can delegate, and there's organizations, AIG and other organizations, delegate a lot of things, but the responsibility still comes here. And, you know, you're elected to make decisions, and the accountability in there, and we appreciate you serving. So, but, you know, we know if you have to do business in Allen, you have to do business in Plano, I wouldn't want to be pushing things through there too, because it does take forever. Well, here, it takes an inclusiveness that you don't need in a lot of those areas where you have small. So I would appeal to you, don't delegate those things. Keep the structure that you've had that's kept Trophy Club unique. Why I moved here is because it was different. They weren't chasing the people that were coming in here. We're trying to set up the commercial. And let me say what can be over-exaggerated is in the schools when people requested tax abatements and so forth, and the whole thing was that would bring in more tax money. Well, our tax rate and the city's tax rate didn't decline any of those situations I was ever in. So please keep the tradition and keep perspective.
Thank you. Larry Mundy.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I live at 8 Brook Hollow Lane, which is sort of behind this 26 acres. And I'm here for purely selfish reasons. I've sat in chairs like this before many times in the development of hotels, and I've done that with the best of intentions. And I've read this entire document. I sent you all an email about it. I think its prescription of what gets built is just pretty darn good. It prescribes appearances in detail. It's going to look good. There will be apartments, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Apartments appear because tenants are easier to get than stores. But I would suggest to you that there are a lot of people renting in Trophy Club now. They're just renting single-family homes owned by banks or people who couldn't sell them. And sometimes I wonder if in a falling real estate market, those renters aren't a lot smarter than I am because they haven't lost so much of their equity. And I'm not here to complain about tax rates because Denton County keeps lowering my appraised value. So as you raise the mill levy, I pay about a sandwich's worth of extra escrow every month. I agree there won't be any condos because nobody's going to buy a condo in a development where you don't know what's going to be next door. I wouldn't buy one. I don't think you'd buy one. So there'll be multifamily rentals there, and they'll probably be perfectly delightful folks. And I agree with what's been said here that the Beck folks aren't likely to foul their own nest by building something tacky because you don't make as much money that way overall. I'm just concerned that my nest gets fouled. So I'm echoing the young lady from Hogan's Glen there. I don't think a KFC is going to be spewing grease into the air by me because I'm on the rear end of this property and nobody's going to drive that far to get to the KFC. It's not that good. But I heard tonight that several studies will be done with respect to the infrastructure. I saw on the website that there would be an infrastructure section in the document. I hear tonight that that's going to be part of the concept plan that doesn't really exist yet. And my concern is that's really the only hard-coded item in this whole process. Once the concept plan becomes stapled to this document, and you all vote yes, that is the only guide there is, because from that point on, there's no discretion to say yea or nay in staff, in planning and zoning, in the council. If it complies with that plan, it's good. So you have to get the plan right. And what I don't see in the plan yet, the concept plan in the existing document is supposed to talk about screening and things like that. I'm obviously very concerned about how that's going to be done. There's no other infrastructure mentioned that I can find. There's a 50-foot setback from my backyard, or it can be as much as 70 to 150 feet if there's an 11 to 7-story building behind me, which I don't think will ever happen because that's the wrong place to put it.
Mr. Mundy, excuse me, but the timer,
I'm done?
you're done.
Okay.
Thank you. And
Please.
thank you for taking the time to send your comments. I thought they were excellent. And by the way, we need to limit it, but if anyone has other comments, please forward them to us. Please let us know. I mean, we're always willing to talk with people. I've met with a lot of people over the last few weeks, so please be sure to do that. And I won't limit you to 3 minutes. Louis Goldstein.
Thank you, Mayor. You heard my name. I live at 68 Cypress Court in Hogan's Glen. I just want to urge the council that this is all about balance. Let's not get in a rush. I'm so excited finally to have an opportunity to have tax revenue that we put the needs and the residents of the community second fiddle. I didn't realize the town of Trophy Club was going in debt or you know, was in that bad a shape financially that we should be blinded to everything else in pursuit of tax revenue. So let's balance this whole process. As a resident of Hogan's Glen, I'm particularly concerned about the integrity of that community. Mr. Beck expressed you know, that he has a long history with the community, so I'm sure that he would be appreciative of my concerns. One of the things I saw in the initial plan or map that was provided on one of the PDFs was that the access to the new development coming off of Indian Creek Road is straight across from the entrance to Hogan's Glen. We know that in this town, if there's a chance to take a shortcut and avoid a light, people will be zipping through that thing. That thing will become a major safety risk, as well as lights shining right through the gates of Hogan's Glen into the neighborhood late into the night. I don't think this is what would be very helpful to Hogan's Glen. I would suggest, if it's not a fire or safety issue, that the council even consider no access from Indian Creek. That's how you preserve the neighborhood behind it, rather than having that. That access right there is the difference of night and day for what will happen to the neighborhood. If that can't be done, if for some reason the development has to have access to Indian Creek, then something else needs to be done to preserve Hogan's Glen. Making the rock wall, that's along Trophy Club Drive, that long pig rock wall, extend along Indian Creek, because there's big wrought iron fence areas where you can see right through into the neighborhood. That may give some integrity to the neighborhood that wouldn't be seen in the current plan. Other things that concern me, 50-foot tall 4-story buildings with a relatively small setback from Indian Creek concerns me quite a bit. Also, if that road is right there across from Hogan's Glen, you look right through, down that road, right out of the entrance, right up to those taller buildings. 11-story building in Trophy Club seems out of character to me with the neighborhood. One last comment, I know my time is up. Light shielding in the parking lots, so the ambient light doesn't blind everybody. I don't really see where it's thoroughly addressed in the development plan at all. Perhaps I just missed it. But that is a significant issue with regard to maintaining community integrity and not being a big eyesore to the whole neighborhood and the residents. Thanks for the time.
Thank you. Did we have any other speakers? No one signed up? Okay. Well, thank you very much. We appreciate everyone taking the time to listen. I thought it was very important that people do take the time to listen to what we were saying and make their comments. And are we ready to move on to our detailed? Yes. Okay. Carolyn, how do you want to proceed here? Do you have a plan?
No, it's entirely up to you and Chairman Hill, how you wish to proceed.
All right, well, let's
Madam
just-
Mayor, we do know that the P&Z has a scheduled meeting for the 20th of this month for the purpose of reviewing this document,
Yes, sir.
page by page, line by line.
Yes, sir.
If it's your pleasure, we've got the consultants here. If you want to do that, that's what we're expecting or intending to do. If you want to defer that to the P&Z, I don't know if the council has a desire to go through this thing page by page. I had a couple of them pull me off to the side during the break. It's certainly this body's pleasure to do what you want to do from this point forward.
We're prepared to go into this in great detail on the 20th, and our meeting will be a public hearing. Is that correct?
It is not a
No,
public
it's not a
hearing.
public hearing. It will be an open meeting.
It's open to the public.
Open to the public. We will intend to conduct it with the commission having a brief opening opportunity for public speech. Then we will go into it line by line, page by page, and prepare for presentation to the town council in a joint session if necessary, or
Chairman, here, what I would recommend then is, there's been a lot of dialogue, I think very healthy dialogue tonight, and I would ask the Beck team, can you and the staff, town staff, can we get together and try to come up with a revised document based on the dialogue that we've had tonight, in order for them to have a new look before they go through this thing page by page? Is that I don't know what your schedules are.
Thursday, right? Yeah. I think
Well-
based on the comments.
I would.
I mean,
if
you
there
know,
are-
we're
Madam
still
Mayor,
talking
there
about
are,
tree preservation, we're talking about, you know, there's a lot of,
Almost there in that.
there's a lot of components that, you know, and based on the dialogue that I think you've heard tonight, you know, that we can make some substantive changes to the document for them to consider,
Well, that makes sense, yes.
yeah, on the 20th.
I think we will do that, yes, sir.
Okay, so you'd commit to getting some of that done? I mean, we can't make these changes ourselves, yeah, obviously, we can't do that. We gotta have your help, so.
That's fine.
I think so.
I,
Pardon me, Madam Mayor, if you would like to check with the council and see if they have specific major items they want the P&Z to pay special attention to in our meeting on the 20th, we would welcome the council's input.
okay.
And we would also welcome written input from the public prior to that meeting, as
Well-
well as their opportunity to speak at the meeting.
We'll continue to receive comment. You know, we've got the website up, or the page on our website, that will at least give anybody who's got any interest the most current information. And if they have comment, they can certainly send it to me or
Well,
to Carolyn
wait.
directly.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine, and that's fine. But we all sent in questions, and I'd like to talk about some answers.
Okay.
I mean, we already did that, okay? And so I don't mean to go through, I don't want to go through page by page either right now, but I know that we had questions, and I know there were some concerns, and I think at the very, we should at least address some of those. Does anyone? Well, I sent my list in, but I can certainly, this is just, is there a difference? I mean, this is a little thing. Is there a difference between live, work, and mixed use? You use those two phrases in different places, and I didn't understand.
Well, the live work typically refers to at least a two-story, if not bigger, structure in which you have a working component on the first floor, typically professional services, offices, and then on the second and third floor, you may have a residence. That's a live work. So I guess your question's good. A live work is a type of mixed-use structure, but a live work means something specific, where you have a residence on top of, again, a professional service or retail or an office.
So mixed use doesn't mean that all the time either? You're saying live work is a type of mixed use?
Yes.
Then what is mixed use?
Well, mixed use can refer to either horizontal or vertical, whether it's spread out mixed use as a mixed use development in total, or a mixed use structure that might have residential that's separate apart from retail and offices on the first floor. In a mixed use, they're connected. In a mixed use structure, in live work, they're connected. In mixed use, they're separate.
Okay. And I think that one of the things that I had been wondering about, and I don't know that I saw it specifically addressed, is, and you mentioned the theater, but like a performing arts type thing, the basic thing is that, are we allowing it? I was wondering if that was.
I don't know if this one.
Because we talked about that, but I want to make sure
Theater
it's.
was in there, unless it got taken out.
It would be our intention to hopefully have it be allowed.
Okay, well, that, because I know that, some kind of a performing arts, it's, we talked about an entertainment destination, and I just want to make sure that we've accommodated. I'm sorry, Bill?
I was going to chime in just a little bit on the live workspace. You're talking about a vertical arrangement. On page 46, it says live workspace, 800 square foot, ground floor only. In this document, in my review, we talk about the comments, maybe forwarding them to P&Z. I know I forwarded them to town staff. I counted them up today. And in my 2 reviews, I now have 151 comments. So I think I can forward that document to P&Z if they'd like to have the first stab at it. Mr. Hill, I've seen your comment pages the other day also. So I don't know if other council members have the same number, but.
Well, I don't think so. I was trying to get to the essence of things as opposed to every detail, or at least understand, make sure I understand. So.
Let me give you an essence. The document says EFS as a construction material.
Says what?
EFIS, E-F-I-S. My background, EFIS is an electronic flight instrumentation system. That is not what this document is. It's a building material, sandwich building material, that from my research has a poor performance record. So when I get to building materials, I'm going to be talking stone.
It has a poor performance when installed incorrectly.
Exactly. And that would be my
Right.
concern.
Well, typically, when you use appropriate installers,
You don't have those problems, yeah.
with it.
I use
But-
this in my business all the time, and haven't had any complaints in years.
The building codes
good
have
builder.
been changed since the time that they had the
Right.
bad rap on it. The building codes have changed, and the process is now an acceptable building process for creating a stucco look.
Yes, I understand. It's a substitute stucco look. Yeah. The concern was with water vapor being
Very much
trapped
so.
behind it, either in the initial installation, poor design, or in maintenance.
Yeah, when installed improperly, you have significant problems with it.
Yes.
And I guess I was trying to understand the private license granted.
The private license is intended in the event we have public streets or public rights-of-way, on which we want to have buildings front with dining areas or even landscaping. We have the ability to get onto that public right-of-way, those parts of the public right-of-way that would allow us to do those types of things, like the outside dining and landscaping.
And one of the things I was wondering about is with any, particularly the outside dining, we would always have walk space,
Yes,
correct?
throughway, correct.
Throughway.
You're going to be required by that by ADA regulations.
Okay.
Absolutely, you'll have to.
I'm sorry, I'm just, Carolyn, did you have your intention, we're talking about a public access, multi-use, a bike pedestrian type trail shall be provided connecting the town of Trophy Club's bike pedestrian trail system with the development within the property. And what I was wondering is, are you talking about something different from the sidewalks? Is this an addition to the normal, I'm trying to understand
The
what.
way I would envision it, in some places it would be, in some places it wouldn't be, depending on where you are within the actual development itself. So if you're talking about, the land parallel and adjacent to the creek, you're probably talking about a bike area, right? Maybe some walking that happens on that also. Once you get into the development, you're going to have, in front of the pizza restaurant, you're going to have a bicycle rack that, kids can park their bikes in front of some type of fountain. But there's also going to be people walking there and all kinds of other things.
I think the intention is to make sure that the city of Trophy Club can get to this property by pedestrian or by bicycle.
That's one of the things, because, what you're saying sounds like a really nice development. I want it to be also a part of the town. I want the town to be involved, not just build something with all the people from from someplace else to come live here and work here and it be an enclosed unit. Do you know what I'm
Yeah,
saying?
you can't put enough residents in this self-enclosed environment to have a successful commercial development. So it wouldn't even be feasible. That's why this whole development will start with, I keep kind of harkening back to these charrettes, which are effectively group gatherings whereby we will solicit, public opinion. One of the gentlemen came up here earlier and was talking about, having some type of congregated gathering area for veterans. That's just an idea, right? There might be there will be hundreds of other ideas similar to that will have to be taken into account when figuring out exactly what this thing's going to look like. We know it's going to be upscale, but exactly what the components are, we know there's a large young population in the town now, as well as a large senior citizen population. So, you got to be cognizant of both of those things and try to marry them together. That's the art of design. That's why you have the charrettes. That's why you have, a lead architectural firm, which is going to be Mike Twitchell's firm, and you're going to invite other architectural firms to come in here and give us their ideas as well as part of the charrette process. So, we're fairly experienced with doing this, but that's that'll be all part of the process as part of the art form as you're developing it.
The question I had, it talked about side and rear setbacks 0 minimum. I guess I don't quite understand how that could be. I mean, how can you have a 0 setback? You're then going to...
Well, that's not a real unusual code. There's a lot of instances in the codes and ordinances where a rear yard has a 0 setback. And side yards also. Front yards usually got a 20-foot setback, 50 setback, whatever. So that's not a real unusual situation.
So you're talking about your rear yard is going to be built right to the property line?
Well, and it could be, depending on how we break up this property.
It'd be internal, because
Yeah.
We've got the streets on 3 sides, and then the creek, we've got that.
Right, I know about that
We've
one.
set those setbacks, so if there are internal lot lines, there could be.
Mayor, the setbacks on Oak Street and Roanoke are 0. In fact, many of those buildings actually encroach into the property line, into the right-of-way. Don't tell the buildings that. but
Oh, okay.
The right-of-way, the public right-of-way is 60 feet on Oak Street, and some of those buildings are 58 feet across from each other. There's a grandfathering there.
You told.
Oh, no, we promised.
Is it normal, and this sort of struck me, that the parking garage be higher than the buildings?
It certainly can be, yes. Legacy, we got 3 of them that way.
Okay, because I noticed that you have a parking garage next to a 4-story building, its maximum could be 6 stories.
Could
And I guess,
possibly.
I thought it was the other way around.
Well, the taller the parking garage is, the more density you can have with buildings
Okay,
at lower heights.
right.
But to the mayor's point, the way this is written, if in fact we had a 12-story hotel, we could have a 14-story parking garage?
But economically, it doesn't make any sense.
Okay, thank you.
Imagine how long it would take you to get down.
Yes,
Just asking a question the way it's written.
Depends on whether you drove off the
remember this, parking garages don't get rent. So you try to you do parking garages because of density of building. And you have to do them wisely also. So they don't have to be, for lack of a better term, ugly. They can be actually halfway decently looking, so.
I'd encourage you to, if you haven't gone to Shops at Legacy, and some of the other projects that I'm sure Michael showed you at the last meeting, he does a really interesting parking garage because the floor plates are actually separated significantly more than in most parking structures, which I found pretty unique, and certainly give a different sense or feel as you actually walk through them. There's a lot of people who are nervous to go into parking garages late at night, and this type of a well-lit environment and the larger floor plates actually give much more light. Doesn't feel like you're in kind of a dungeon, if you will. And anyways, I encourage you to go look at them, and that's what we would envision for this project as well.
Something that confuses me when I'm reading through this whole thing, I'm looking at the townhome requirements which say individually platted lots. And in a lot of places, and this is maybe a question for you guys too, we talk about this being treated as one lot for certain purposes. And that, for one, it confuses me, but for another, it seems to me like that could get questionable on how we handle that. And I wonder if somebody can explain that concept to me. And where we're talking about, we're treating something as one lot. Well, if you're treating it as one lot, your signs, I mean, for one example, would be an issue. And so...
There are several ways that comes up. Signage is one good way, where if we've got, if these are separately platted, or if this property is separately platted, a use that wants to be on a sign towards the frontage, that sign isn't considered a non-premise sign or billboard. So we thought it made sense for the entire property for signage purposes to be considered as one track, so you don't have a proliferation of signs, those types of signs. I think for parking purposes, it also makes sense so you don't have a proliferation of surface parking. You can aggregate parking in central locations, and that's typically done in these types of developments as well. The townhomes, though, if they are intended to be sold, they would be, each individual unit would be on a separately platted lot, and I think that's where we're going with the townhome concept. The townhomes would be on separately platted lots.
Okay, you didn't say you were going to put a billboard there that just then, did I?
No.
Okay.
I said we
just
do
wanted
not.
to make sure.
I said we do not want to put one there.
Okay. Okay.
And we've been told.
Make sure it sounded a little. Okay, I'm still, Carolyn, can you help me out, or with the single lot, where a single lot versus, I'm just having trouble understanding the impact of that.
Well, we don't know yet which way this is going to go. And so overall, we've been talking about platting this as, we've been talking about the development overall. And you're absolutely right on this. If we're going to plat individual townhomes, then we need to look more carefully at what is going to, what rules are going to apply to those individual lots. So it's something that we still have to consider. And you're right, we don't have all the answers for this yet.
Just on the multifamily, I know you've talked about, urban and all, but 500 feet is, and I'm from New York. I still think it's really small. This one, the valet parking plan, is that a permanent or temporary when they submit a valet parking plan?
Both.
Could be both.
Both? Because it says, if the plan is not approved within 2 days of submittal, it will be deemed approved. First of all, I hope that means 2 business days. But secondly, what if somebody's out of the office? I mean, 2 days is not a lot of time. If it's temporary, that's one thing, but
I think we need to add in some language that it is 2 business days, and perhaps we need to, I anticipated that would be a discussion at the Planning and Zoning Commission. That's come up on a number of different lists from the P&Z commissioners that they're concerned with that procedure. And I think we probably will add some language to clarify whether it's permanent or temporary. And if it is permanent, then there are other areas of the document where they address a parking plan, which does, I believe it says, at the owner's discretion and with staff approval. And that would be the more permanent solution. If it's temporary, we perhaps need to extend the approval process.
2 days is kind of, especially if it doesn't say business days.
Mayor, if I could.
Mm-hmm.
I find, just drawing back from memory, I find that one interesting because it says that if it's not approved in 2 days, it's approved.
Yeah.
You give it to me, I disapprove it, and 2 days later, it's approved because it wasn't approved when you submitted it.
Oh, that.
I found it a very interesting sentence.
That works out pretty well.
That does. That does.
Wow.
Win-win.
I couldn't have even.
That's great, Dawson.
Well done.
Oh, my heavens. Okay.
It's one of the 151 comments.
And I guess the architectural roof sign is, I got a little confused on. It says that they're prohibited along 114. But that's where they would want to be. I guess I don't understand that.
Where is that?
I'm looking at page 56, and
Okay.
it says architectural roof signs are prohibited on frontages along State Highway 114, Trophy Club Drive, and Indian Creek. Well, I think that it would seem to me like along 114 is the place you would want that.
I would agree.
Probably is.
It's on 55, I
Take
think, at the
114
bottom,
out.
55. Number,
Yeah.
I agree.
little 2 at the bottom of the page.
Madam Mayor, we agree.
Hmm?
We agree with you. It's the opposite.
Should be permitted.
Right.
Okay. Oh, and is the super graphic signs, is that what we call, really super graphic signs?
I'm sorry?
This is all you, Bill. Super graphics. Go ahead.
No. If the issue is the content of this message, then it's inflammatory. They're using super graphics all over the country for a lot of different purposes, and we're using them, yes, in some
Like a Christmas tree.
I'm just asking what they are.
No, it is that.
That's
It's that.
that's
It's
what it is.
basically a graphical representation of something that's attached to the side of a building. But the majority of places that you see, like in downtown Dallas, right, when they were having the Super Bowl, right, they had pictures of the players on the sides of buildings.
Right.
Okay? Or for the All-Star games, they had NBA players on the sides of
In
buildings.
downtown Dallas right now, there's a super graphics, 10 stories tall, iPad too.
Yep.
That's all it is.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
iPad.
Oh,
Picture iPads, 10,
Yes.
10 stories tall, probably.
They had a Murano down there for years. Nissan did.
Yeah, they change them quite often in downtown Dallas. So
Plastic overlays.
I'll have to look into that one.
Ran out of red markers.
Those were, we don't need to go through those.
Mary, would you like a definition of a super graphic sign
Sure.
provided by Susan Edstrom? It says, think Times Square. Here's a definition from Google. Super graphics are very large signs consisting of a message printed on flexible material, generally plastic-based, attached to a building with adhesive, anchor bolts, or a frame structure. They can be limited to on-site or non-commercial messages or can provide off-site advertising. Although much larger than a traditional billboard, super graphics can function like a billboard where an outdoor advertising company leases a building facade, sells the advertising space, and changes the message periodically.
Okay, let's look at that one. That's, yeah.
I think there was a downtown Dallas building during the NBA playoffs with a picture of Dirk Nowitzki or something like that.
Well,
across my
that's
window.
different from,
Across your window.
okay, we're going to have to look at that one. I had other questions, but those were the ones that, I mean, I'm not trying to get into everybody's, did anyone else have any?
I'll pass mine to Carolyn.
Okay. Well, I did too, but did you get answers?
I'll get them.
Okay. Y'all are good? And you're going to go through yours? Okay, well.
Comment over here. Commissioner Sheridan, did you add your hand?
Oh, I was just trying to clarify that nothing in this PD says anything about subdividing. And if a subdivision did come into play, it would still have to come back through P&Z. Now, I was specifically going to townhomes. If you're going to go to, if townhome is a single-family attached on an individual lot, so that would have to be subdivided, would have to come through P&Z, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. That's all I was trying to get clarified.
Anybody else? Do you all have any?
We'll take ours up on the 20th.
Okay. Council? Well,
Mayor,
yes, sir?
I want to address a couple of the issues that were brought by the citizens.
Okay.
And I don't recall who all said what, but it's important to note that, as an example, the proposed line that's on the concept plan today on the far east side, I think Mr. Goldstein was referring to, it was a cut through from Indian Creek to the frontage road. If it on that concept plan is if it's a dashed line, and that is conceptual. It doesn't mean that there'll be a road there. There are a bunch of hoops and hurdles that you got to get through, just with TxDOT as an example, to get curb cuts right there next to the entrance ramp to 114 as an example. And they'll only allow limited curb cuts on the frontage road. So it's a conceptual thing. If you see a dashed line there with your A streets or their B streets or whatever they are, it's not to say that that's where a road is going. It's just conceptual at this point. It could.
And to reiterate that, it means that with probably 99% certainty, it will be moving if it's dashed.
What it does indicate, though, is that there needs to be a road through there.
Right.
This will keep it from being a site with a big box dropped in the middle and parking all the way
Exactly.
around it. This is a commitment from Mr. Beck that this will not be a traditional strip, big box environment.
Yeah, it's really.
But where the road goes, who knows?
It's to delineate the fact that there is circulation interiorly within the project.
There was one question that I had last time, and I thought we talked about it, but going from that street on the east side, there is no circulation. And that, to me, is an issue. I was wondering that
We can
you
take
would-
away all of them and just write the word circulation in the middle, if that makes it better for you.
Well, it's just that
I
one
recommended,
street.
by the way, I mean, my recommendation was that we didn't put any roads on the mayor, because I knew it would be confusing to people. Like, we don't need to have any roads on there at all, and just write the word that it will circulate, if that is better. Happy to do it right now for the next time it comes in.
No, I just like to see
I don't
some
think that's
opening
better.
on that street. This one, you see that there be something coming through. It's just that one street just cuts the side of it and not,
I know, but
doesn't touch the internal at
It's
all.
conceptual.
Right.
That's why I said we can remove it and just write the word circulate.
No, I'd like to see conceptual street.
Okay.
Oh,
Second point I want to make, Mayor, and several of the citizens suggested we, take our time, do it right. I think we've all understood that we need to get this document right. I mean, if it's going to work, it's got to be right. What I don't think a lot of people understand is we've been working on this document since March. It's not like we have just turned over a leaf and put this in front of you. There's a lot of effort that's been put into this document to date by town staff and the development team to get to the point where we feel like we're comfortable enough to at least put it in front of you and say, here's where we're at. It's by no stretch of the imagination do we think we're there yet. But we got to the point where we couldn't make those decisions without your guidance and direction. And I don't want our citizens to think that we're just, this fly-by-night kind of deal that says, wouldn't that be neat, and let's throw it up there and see if it sticks. This thing's been worked on for the better part of 7 months, very regularly, routinely. And for that, I appreciate the staff, and I certainly appreciate the development team for helping us through this process. And lastly, I'm going to comment on what Susan's said. I do recall saying the elm tree for the oak tree or vice versa. The point I was making was that our community has been labeled, right, wrong, or indifferent, has been labeled with, being very difficult to work with the developers. We've had several opportunities that people have come to the town and decided to go different ways. And what this document represents is a loosening of that grip, if you will. And I've used an inflammatory example, and I probably should have used a better example. But the message, I don't know that there's ever been an example where you've had to go through this process to replace one tree for another. The bigger message was we've got to become a little more developer friendly, at the same time maintaining control and predictability as we continue to move forward. That's all I have, Mayor.
Thank you. Okay. One thing I do want to make sure, however, especially after you all have had a chance to look at it, I want to make sure that our questions we do get to answer our questions.
Yes.
I understand it probably doesn't make sense to go through them line by line right tonight because we've already talked about a lot of changes, because you guys have a lot more input and expertise on it than certainly we do. But we do need to have that point.
Yes,
That
ma'am.
our questions get answered.
For tonight, I was trying to summarize everyone's comments. Got very good comments from everyone and quite a few in detail. Thank you, Councilman Rose. And I did not have time to go through all of that for tonight, but that will start tomorrow.
Okay. Well, and again, we might be worthwhile to see what our experts come up with.
Mayor, if I could.
Yes, sir.
And one of the things, as a council person, I have to realize, and I think we all realize it, is I may have a list full of comments, but those comments may not carry the council. They're strictly my thoughts on a particular issue. They may not carry P&Z. So here again, so they have to be taken with a significant grain of salt.
May I make a comment?
Certainly.
I just wanted to, in closing, for our development team, is to thank all of you, and staff especially, certainly planning and zoning and city council, for taking the time to start reviewing the document. I hope that we've, as Mike has articulated, we've been working on this for the better part of 7 months, and finally got to a position where hopefully now you guys can really dig in and help us to take it the rest of the way across the goal line. And I know myself and my two colleagues definitely look forward to working with you over the next couple of months here as we continue to embark on this path to really try to build a beautiful development. That's something that we all can be proud of, and that we can leave as a legacy for the residents to come and the generations to come after. So I do thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Is anyone else?
Mayor, I do have a council person who has asked if we can perhaps design some golf cart accessibility to this project. I had to ask it, so I'm sorry.
You need some little parking places, plug-in places.
Yeah.
That's not a problem.
Well, that's probably where everything is going. Everything's going to have plugs, right?
Yeah.
So long as the golf cart is street legal.
Okay, regular
there should be
cars
streets
are going to be
Part of our. Okay, do I have a motion?
Mayor, I was just going to make
Oh.
my comments
Okay.
as brief as possible. I just want to kind of second Mr. Beck there. We certainly appreciate y'all's time and your development team to be here tonight. I think the meeting was productive. I do want to reassure the citizens that the biggest, boldest letter on top of here is draft. It's a document in process. Development business has changed. It's gotten very complex. End users are, I guess the simple word say, are very demanding and short-winded or short. Their timetable to make a decision is quick, and like I said, whether it's ICSC or another place, Mr. Beck and his team are competing against thousands of others, and there's a limited capacity there. And so this document, on one side needs to be fluid enough that allows, I'm going to use the word flexibility to it, but it needs to be clear enough and enough clarity in the document that they can, when the question's answered to them, they can say yes or no. We can do this, we can't do that, with some reasonable uncertainty. If that can't happen, that makes their decision-making process that much more unclear. And if they go, well, I'm not sure, I think we can do this, but we just got to go through P&Z and then maybe through council, and what that end user hears, I'll see you, because I've got the next guy down the road that's willing to go, here's the next just as good as a deal, and this is where I'm going to put my place. So if we're going to go compete in the marketplace, I think we need to have a document that's working this way. To quote a past, I'll just say a past reference that I've heard numerous times before, is that if we're not careful with Trophy Club and get too rigid in our ways, again, we want to do it right, and I'm extremely passionate about that, but if we don't, we miss the opportunity, then Trophy Club can become the donut hole instead of the donut, and nobody wants that. So how do you compete in that process? And I think we're well on the way to give Mr. Beck and his team a document that can work. We're certainly not done yet. There's a lot of fine-tuning here, but again, the more work that we put in the front end and the more clarity we're able to get, then the work and the uncertainty and the trust, if you want to call it, whether it's staff or whoever to go through that process, it's there. And like I said, we don't have a hard timetable now. Certainly they want to get something down the road because the industry and the market is starting to change, and they certainly want to have a sellable asset when it's time, not, it's much easier to have it in place and I'm ready to go, now I've got something to sell, versus, okay, here's the market that's ready, and oh, wait a second, I don't have anything. So, again, I appreciate everybody's time, and it's a process, and hopefully we have calmed some of the concerns of our residents out here, that it's not a rush through, push through thing, and it's been a working process, and we're not done yet. But I'm proud of where we're at, and I'm looking towards the finish line.
Yes.
I'd like to tell the Beck Group that we look forward to a work session on the 20th, which I'm sure will be beneficial to both parties. We'll make it, do everything we can to expedite it, and just come up with the right document for both the town and for the developer. Look forward to it.
And I want to thank you very much for your time and patience here, and
Thank you.
information, and I'm encouraged that we're moving in the right direction.
Planning and Zoning Commission is adjourned.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Okay, the city council